Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Helen could barely hold back her tears again. She believed again for the umpteenth time that everything would still be okay. But Adriana and her daughter Jenna, now they will once again put Helen in front of her father. A stupid, spoiled brat who has a hard time going through adolescence. I knew, of course, that tough period. Rolled Adriana's eyes in front of her upset spouse. But what is Helen doing going downhill? If you only knew how hard it is for me to keep her in line. It wasn't like that with Jenna. I know you do a lot for Helen, and I appreciate it. The father spoke with his eyes downcast, ashamed of his daughter, of her supposedly ugly behavior. And the most frustrating thing was that it was useless to explain to him. Helen had tried many times to convey to her family that Adriana was constantly denigrating her. When her father is not at home, her stepmother humiliates her, floods her with endless errands, does not let her study, meet with friends, do her favorite things. But Adriana is a virtuoso at manipulating people and a wonderful actress. Besides, she always manages to turn the father against his daughter. She picks up such words that after them all explanations and arguments of Helen seem to the man pathetic, excuses, and attempts to cast aspersions on a holy woman who pulls someone else's difficult child. So now Helen will not even try to prove to her father that she is not guilty of anything. It would get her nowhere. The girl sat on her bed, crammed into the very corner, and tucked her face into a huge teddy bear. She was given it by her grandmother's neighbor, David. Helen was 7 years old at the time. How thrilled was she when she saw her neighbor with the big toy in his hands. He walked into their house, as always, with a big smile on his face. It was the most wonderful time. I wish I could go back there, remembered her grandmother. Helen smiled. Yes, the girl was endlessly longing for a family member who loved her and accepted her completely. Grandmother surrounded her only granddaughter with warmth and care. She talked to her a lot, hugged her often, but she's gone. Helen has been around for almost 5 years. Grandmother Faith did not become when the girl was 10. And since then, Helen's life has changed a lot, and not for the better. But Helen's childhood was simply wonderful. Despite the fact that the girl did not know her own mother, she felt quite happy under her grandmother's wing. Helen's mom died right after she gave birth to her first and only long-awaited child. Some unforeseen complications from the birth. There was nothing the doctors could do. And so it was that Stephen, Helen's father, found himself with an infant in his arms. He loved his wife very much and could not recover from her loss for a long time. What to do with a newborn baby? Stephen had no idea. He was scared to even hold his daughter in his arms. Good thing his mother was there for him. At this difficult moment, she took the girl to the great relief of a confused son, completely absorbed in his own grief. At first, the grandmother lived in a city apartment orphaned into the life of the family. Helen's mother had no parents for a long time. They died when she was still a student. Stephen worked as a mechanic on a fishing boat and often went on voyages, and he was not particularly eager to take care of babies. So Helen was left in the full care of her grandmother. At first, the grandmother tried to establish a connection between the daughter and the father. She wanted Stephen to take care of the baby himself, not that it was difficult for the grandmother. No, it's just the right thing to do, the right thing to do. But the man wouldn't hear of it. He was in grief, and he blamed his daughter for what happened to his beloved wife. Helen realized this later when she was older. For a long time, her father thought that it would be better if he and his wife lived without children at all, traveled, paid all their attention to each other, and were happy. Stephen was very much in love with his young, beautiful wife and was experiencing the loss of her. Long and hard. In the end, Grandma was tired of being the link between Stephen and Helen. She had long wanted to go to her small homeland in a cozy house under a green roof in the village. And she had a lot of things to do there. A vegetable garden, chickens, cats, and a dog. For all this farm during the prolonged absence of grandmother looked after neighbor David. Of course, they had a good and warm relationship. Grandma has helped him out many times too. But it's time to do the honors. I'm sure you can't get through to a grown-up son. Grandma packed up little Helen and went home with her. Stephen was only too glad for this turn of events. The baby clearly annoyed him and reminded him of the tragedy with its mere appearance. Besides, the man had to go on a long voyage soon, which also pleased him. Waves of socializing with coworkers is hard physical labor. Stephen hoped that all this would help him to distract himself from the heavy thoughts. In part, by the way, it did. And the grandmother, with its inherent energy included in the care of the little granddaughter Diaper Duke Shanko, walks with a stroller. It was as if she felt like a young mother again, only now she was already enjoying motherhood with full commitment. When her own son Stephen was a baby, the woman did not realize what happiness it is, a child. She had to deal with a whole bunch of things at once, to rebuild the life in a small village house, to finish studying at the local college, and to work part-time. Those were hard times. Now she's an old woman. She gave all her time, all her attention, all her warmth to Helen. Looking at the girl, she felt a mixture of pinched tenderness and acute pity. How can it be such a tiny girl has already been left without a mother? And the father, it seems, does not burn with desire to deal with his daughter. The son's behavior was very upsetting. A caring grandmother. But she hoped that she could fix everything. Helen grew up a sweet and trouble-free child with few illnesses. She did everything on time and sat up and walked and talked. Her grandmother couldn't get enough of her. The girl grew up surrounded by friendly people, from whom only warmth and acceptance came. First of all, of course, her grandmother. She was the most important person for Helen. Reliable, caring, kind, always understand, always support. She opened the world to her granddaughter, talked to her a lot about everything in the world, explained complicated things to her. Helen did not remember that once her grandmother brushed off her questions, as it usually happens with adults. You won't understand yet. You will when you grow up. Go away. I don't have time for you right now. There had never been anything like that between Grandma and Helen. It was like they understood each other without words. And grandmother also had friends and neighbors, and they too participated in Helen's upbringing. The girl went to visit them, made friends with their grandchildren. There were times when a bunch of children ran from house to house, where they would have breakfast together, where they would have lunch, where they would watch TV together. Someone's father would take a wonderful group to the river or to the woods. It was fun. The girl had a particularly warm relationship with David. His house stood opposite the grandmother's, and the elderly man often came to the neighbor to help her with men's chores. To fix a faucet, to fix the roof on the shed, to move a closet. And his grandmother would feed him delicious pies and treat him to huge cutlets. David was a widower. Helen, hearing this strange word for the first time, frowned thoughtfully, trying to understand what it meant. Grandmother explained, of course, there was no one to bake pies for the neighbor. Of course, the man was perfectly able to cope with the billet with hunger, did not die. But he never learned the art of baking. Already later, Helen realized that, apparently, the neighbor felt for her grandmother not only friendly feelings. Why not? He's a widower. The neighbor's husband had also died long ago, but her grandmother. She probably decided to devote her whole life to her granddaughter without distractions for anything else. The old woman had big plans for Helen's future. She did a lot with the girl, put all her soul into her, and thought that she would be with her granddaughter for a long time, and would teach her and marry her, and even help her with her great-grandchildren. It didn't work out. About childhood. Thanks to her grandmother, the girl has the warmest memories. Helen especially loved summer. That's a really cheerful, carefree couple. Her granddaughters Kathy and Maria came to David for vacations. They were Helen's best friends. She'd been looking forward to them all year. The girls had been together all day, and the three of us were never bored. But still they, in the company of other village kids, liked to spend time on bicycles, raced to the river, and went to the forest. They played hide and seek and catch up. They told scary stories in the evenings and played soccer barefoot. We crawled home, tired, grimy, but happy. Often the children slept over at Helen's grandmother's. She never refused her granddaughter. If the girl asked to leave someone to sleep over, there was plenty of room in the house. The children chatted and giggled all night. But the grandmother did not reprimand them. She understood how fun and great it was. Helen, of course, realized early on that she was living a different life than the other children at other people's houses. They didn't all have fathers, but they had moms. Mothers were all kinds of young and grown-up beautiful, and not very strict and kind. They were always there for their kids, and dads too. Of course, Helen started asking her grandmother questions early on. Well, and had to tell the girl about what had happened. Carefully, very carefully, the woman told the little girl the story of her birth. Helen did not know her mom, so she was not too upset. Especially the grandmother said that Mom was now in heaven and was helping her daughter from there. It was like a beautiful fairy tale, but every now and then a longing for something beautiful and unfulfilled. A child's heart would clench. Helen sometimes imagined what it would be like to live a particular moment of life if Mom were there. However, these thoughts did not particularly disturb the girl while she lived with her grandmother in the village. Helen was there warmly, cozily, well. Father, of course, he sometimes appeared at her mother's house. Always came on Helen's birthday with presents, if he wasn't on a voyage. And at least once every 2 months he visited his own. For Helen, it was familiar and dear, but practically a stranger. A handsome young man with sad gray eyes, always trim, always beautifully dressed. He appeared with gifts of beautiful dolls, outfits, dresses, interesting books. Helen wondered how her father always manages to guess so accurately what she dreams about. Does it really read her mind? Then the girl realized that it was her grandmother who told her son what to buy for Helen in the city. The father came usually for a couple of days, less often, for a week or 2. He didn't know what to talk to his daughter about. He asked the usual questions about her studies, friends, and hobbies. The girl saw that he wasn't particularly interested in any of that. Not like David. The one loved to listen, told him about the adventures of village children. He laughed, recalled some episodes from his childhood. Unobtrusively gave important advice. The elderly neighbor was just a wonderful listener. But he asked his father only because he had to. Helen understood this even as a very young girl. The girl really wanted to please her father, to interest him, at least something to please him, after all. But in vain. All Helen's attempts were shattered by the indifference of this man. He diligently performed his paternal duties. Duties transferred money to his mother, bought necessary things for the house. When he came to visit, he was engaged in the vegetable garden and repairs. But did it all out of a sense of duty. Mental affection between him and his daughter never appeared. The grandmother tried to bring up her son, explained to him how to behave with the girl. The adults thought Helen was asleep, but she heard everything. A girl needs a father's attention in a low voice, the mother explained to her son. She's growing up. Come and visit her often, or go on vacation with her and fly to the sea. You know, Mom, I work hard all the time. I go on voyages. I earn money. By the way, Helen for the future, just the present is often forgotten. Sadly, sighed Grandma. I don't forget? No. I see how well you're doing. Helen is happy with you. What can I give her? I'm still a little upset myself. Helen, even though she was still very young, realized that she was burdening her father with her very existence. No, he won't take her on vacation or have her father visit her more often. He is better off on his own, without her and without her grandmother of some incomprehensible lonely life. It was a shame. Helen, you love your only parent very much to realize that your father didn't need you. It's scary and unpleasant. The girl even cried a little into her pillow, but in the morning she behaved as if nothing had happened. And then the father left, hugging his daughter, as always in farewell. I'm going on a long voyage, he warned. I won't see you for a long time. I won't be able to come to you on September 1. I'm sorry, that's all right. Carelessly waved her hand. She was not used to her father being absent at the most important moment of her life. No big deal. But her grandmother was always there for her. It was the summer before Helen's first grade. The girl remembered it well because in August she had a birthday party on which an important event took place. Grandma, as always, had set 2 tables in the garden, one for the children and one for their parents and grandparents. She always made her granddaughters' birthdays so crowded, cheerful, colorful. and she herself took great pleasure in socializing with the good people of the party. Both Helen and her grandmother looked forward to it all year long. David showed up a little later than the other guests. He gave Helen a huge teddy bear that his granddaughters Kathy and Maria helped him pick out. Helen was delighted when she saw the teddy bear. She had never had such a huge toy before. "Happy birthday!" Kathy and Maria rushed over to hug the birthday boy. "Thank you for." Helen clapped her hands. "What's that thing David's holding?" "I found a guitar in the attic the other day. I was sorting it out, thinking I'd throw it away, and I came across this instrument. Sergeyevich, and I had forgotten that you are a musician," rejoiced grandmother. "Since when you haven't played, I guess. As soon as your wife died, you never picked up a guitar." "Yes, about 15 years have passed," nodded the neighbor. His eyes flashed with sadness. "I forgot about the guitar, and then suddenly I found it and remembered it." "Play us something," asked one of the adult guests. "Play it, play it." The kids picked up on it. Kathy and Maria studied proudly next to their grandfather. You bet, David had suddenly become the star of the party. Everybody's looking at him. How everyone asks him. "Why do you want to play ditties or what?" asked the man. Everyone murmured approvingly. Then David intercepted the guitar more comfortably, struck the strings with his fingers, and some magic began. Melodic sounds filled the garden, and Helen looked at her neighbor with her mouth open in amazement. How does he do this? How does this beautiful melody come about? The guests fell silent, looking at David. "Why are you singing? Come on, who's first? Who's the bravest?" The mother of a neighbor boy of one of Helen's friends started a thick bass ditty, and she sang something about 1000000, which is like a calf. The adults laughed, but Helen didn't get into the meaning of the ditty. She listened to the melody. The guests got into a frenzy. They ordered David more and more songs. And he, strangely enough, knew them all. Well, if he didn't know them, he quickly picked up the right tunes. The adults sang in an unstructured chorus. It was so wonderful, so funny, so beautiful. The children left the table and started a game of hide and seek. Of course, they called Helen too, but Helen couldn't tear herself away. She sat next to David and listened. And then suddenly, as if imperceptibly, began to sing along with the adults the words of the song about a wounded soldier she quickly learned. The guests sang, and it was probably the third time. Mom was the first to notice it. "Listen," she suddenly said. "Do you hear how she sings?" The guests fell silent. Helen too. She was embarrassed to sing alone Glinka at her mother. Realized this and dragged out the song with her. It was easier for Helen that way. When the chords with milk broke out applause. "Well done." Helen was praised by the adults. "You sing well." Not just good shook her head. "The girl has talent. I'm telling you this as an employee of our House of Culture. Why did you hide such a treasure from us for so many years?" "I didn't know." The proud grandmother smiled. Since then, David became an even more frequent guest in the house of grandmother and granddaughter. And Helen herself now constantly ran to him. The man taught the girl many children's funny songs. Now she constantly hummed them everywhere at home, in the vegetable garden, even on the way to the store. Why Helen had not realized before how great it was to sing. She didn't go to daycare as it was too far to drive her. Grandma didn't work anyway. Her granddaughter was already growing up with her. In the kindergarten, of course, the music worker would have noticed Helen's talent earlier. But at home, they had almost no music house. Grandmother usually included audiobooks, not songs. So it wasn't until Helen was 7 that she realized she incredibly enjoyed singing and music. "School will start. We'll give you to the House of Culture, my mother's Clinks. She says they have a good choir there. I even invite them to other cities for performances. You'll sing there. You can't bury such talent in the ground." Helen listened to her grandmother and looked forward to September. She wanted to go on stage. She wanted to be with people who shared her hobbies. The future seemed bright and fabulous. And then the girl asked David to teach her to play the guitar. He refused at first. "It's too early for you yet. Your fingers are small. Your hands are weak. You can't even hold such a big thing." But the neighbor was wrong. Helen was able to play the right chords the first time. Maria and Kathy even clapped their hands in joy for their friend. "See, Grandpa, she's doing it. Will you teach her?" "Of course I will." He scratched the back of his head in puzzlement. "David, where will you go?" Now the neighbor kept his promise. He now taught little Helen every day with a chord and everything he knew himself. The pupil was making great progress. Not only that the girl grasped everything on the fly, she also learned to pick up melodies. Of course, in this I do not know, David shared his observations with his grandmother Helen. But she seems to have an exceptional ear. She would be in music school. "That would be nice," sighed Grandma. "But we don't have it on Petrovka. There's only a choir here. And you can't go to the city every day. At least they'll take her to the choir." She promised, even though her granddaughter is still young, older kids sing there. And then came the long-awaited September 1. Helen still remembered how her grandmother proudly led her through the village streets by the hand to the school line. The girl was a little nervous, but it was a joyful excitement. She and her grandmother carefully prepared for the festive day. The day before they went to the city, where they chose the most beautiful things: lacquered shoes, dressy white blouse, puffy dark skirt. In the morning, the grandmother cried Helen tight braids, which she decorated with large white bows in the hands of her granddaughter. The woman slipped a beautiful bouquet, gladioluses. Helen even now remembered what delightful fragrance they exuded. Passers-by smiled. Grandmothers, dressed-up granddaughters, congratulated both of them on the beginning of their school journey. They wished the girl all A's. Helen thanked the people. She knew that there would be a party in the evening. Her grandmother had already invited the neighbor kids to visit and had made the dough for her special pies from the evening. Helen was also waiting for the beginning of classes at the House of Culture. She wanted so much to sing on stage. Helen's mom assured that Helen would really like the teacher. And so it turned out. Peter Andreevich highly appreciated the abilities of the new student. True, he did not let her down, despite her age. If the girl did not hit the notes or confused words, strictly reprimanded. But those were minor things. The main thing Helen felt in her element. Grandmother worried that the modest granddaughter is divided in front of the audience. But no, the little singer behaved on stage like a fish in water. First, Helen was put in the back, and then she began to perform solo. Peter Andreevich could not be pleased with his pupil. Such a gift is rare. He told his grandmother when she came to pick up her granddaughter. A real unlimited diamond. She should be in good hands. What do we have here? An ordinary village DK. Helen never gave up her guitar lessons either. It had already become a daily necessity for her. As a student, the girl had long ago surpassed her neighbor's teacher. But still, she went to visit David every day. In the first place, he had a guitar. In the second place, the neighbor could always give valuable and important advice about playing. But thirdly, no one Helen knew more about music than David. He would praise in a matter-of-fact way. He noticed subtleties. He sincerely admired the success of the little neighbor. Later, living with her father, Helen learned the expression soulmate. Probably she and David were these very soulmates. The neighbor replaced the grandfather Helen had never known, and maybe even her father at some points. As time went on, she grew up. She did well in school, performed with the choir. She continued to learn to play the guitar. Her father gave his daughter her own instrument for her birthday. Of course, it was his grandmother who gave him the gift idea. The girl had everything she needed to be happy. A caring grandmother, near understanding kind neighbors, loyal friends. Helen felt loved and native. In the village, she was her own and did not even think about moving to her father in the city. What to do there? Gray concrete boxes instead of houses, crowds of people rushing somewhere, who do not even look at each other. And her father was her own, but not at all familiar to her distant. People around her often said that there were more prospects in the city, that it would be much more interesting for the girl to grow up there. But Helen felt quite happy and satisfied with life. Her childhood had been warm, sunny, cozy. Until that fateful day in February when David came to school to pick her up for some reason. Helen had long since gone to school and returned home alone. Her grandmother had accompanied her at first, but since the second grade, Helen had become quite independent. The road was not close, but in the company of friends and neighbors, time flew by. The girls walked and talked about everything. They laughed, discussed the details of the school day, made plans. And then suddenly there was a knock on the door during a literature lesson. A quiet conversation between the teacher and someone who hadn't crossed the threshold. And then the teacher's worried eyes. Her quiet request, "Helen, get ready for you, your neighbor is here." Helen felt the stares of everyone in the class fixed on her. That was how unusual this was. When Helen saw David, she knew something terrible had happened. The blank stare, the gray color of his face. The hands of the always calm man nodded slightly. Grandmother immediately guessed Helen. Her heart was squeezed with an icy hand and alarm. In that instant, the girl realized that Grandma was the whole world to her. The man nodded silently. "What's wrong with her?" "She's not well. They took her to the hospital." About her grandmother being gone. David said the girls are only at home. The woman suddenly got sick, had a heart attack. She crouched on a bench in the house, thinking to wait it out. This is how she was caught by a neighbor who came to borrow some eggs. They immediately called an ambulance, but the doctors who arrived could only state the fact of death. So Helen was left alone, all alone in the world. That night she was taken in by her neighbor Clara. She and her grandmother were close friends. In the company of a kind-hearted woman and her grandchildren, Helen was not so dreary, as if she was alone at home. But the girl was still in some incomprehensible state. Everything that was happening seemed unreal to her. This simply could not happen. How so? Grandma's gone. So what? She'll never be gone again. Never again. My father was on a voyage and he was informed, of course. But it took time to get to the big land. The man didn't even make it to the funeral organized by the neighbors. In those terrible days, Helen somehow did not think about her future. She cried a lot, often talking to the neighbors about her grandmother. They knew and loved her. They said nice things about her. That made the girl feel a little better. And then her father arrived, awkwardly hugged his daughter, and said the words that made Helen once again shrink from pain. That the daughter would now mean living together in the city. Like in the city. Why in the city? Helen did not want to leave the new Petrovka at all. Grandmother, of course, is gone and will never be. But here is the school, here are friends, here are neighbors, here is the choir. After all, here is David, who will always support and comfort. There's Clara, Helen's mom. And there's what? A cold, alien father who knows nothing at all about his daughter. He's a downer for Helen, if anything, a stranger. "I'm not going with you," Helen said firmly. Pulled away from her parent. "I'm not going to town." The man looked at his daughter, flapping his eyes confusedly. He didn't know what to say to her in response. The neighbors came to the rescue. Very carefully they conveyed to Helen the idea that there was no other way out. The neighbors hugged the girl and said that they would miss her very much. In the eyes of these people were tears of women and men, grandmothers and grandfathers. They all gave her their phone numbers and assured her that they would always welcome her calls. Helen was crying too, and it was hard to part with Novopetrovskaya. But the sensitive adults managed to convince the girl that she had to do it. There was no other way. "You come to visit," David said. "On vacation with a little picture will live at my place. I don't care if there are 2 girls or 3. You'll have more fun." Helen knew it wasn't a polite invitation. David really sincerely waited for her on vacation, and it made her feel a little warmer and brighter. So Helen went to the city. It was not the first time the girl found herself in her father's apartment. She and her grandmother sometimes came to visit him. Helen even had her own room here, a bed, a large, separate closet, a desk, everything a child needs. Truth be told, the girl never liked this place much better. She loved her bedroom in her grandmother's house. There were many cozy and important things there, plush toys, interesting books, an aquarium with shark fish. But there was no escape. We'll have to get settled in the new place. The first thing Helen did was to put on the bed the very teddy bear that David had given her in the summer before the 1st grade. At once it became cozier. The toy reminded the girl of those happy, carefree times when her grandmother was around. Helen's life was completely upside down. There was a lot to get used to. A new room, a new school, New faces around unfamiliar terrain, other rules. A father constantly immersed in his own thoughts. He'd moved to a new position that didn't involve months of traveling. He had to be near his daughter all the time, and he was indeed constantly present. But only physically. Stephen was clearly far away. Helen, I saw, my father misses the sea, his colleagues, his friends, his old job. And he often complained to acquaintances that he gets much less money now. I'm not used to living like this, counting pennies until payday. The man told one of his former colleagues over the phone. You can't earn as much here on the big land as you can at sea. Stephen tried very hard to be a good father. In the mornings, he made his daughter breakfast. In the evenings, he remembered to ask her how her day was. He listened to her parents half-heartedly. Helen saw perfectly well that he was not at all interested in what she thought of the teacher, and which of her classmates said what to her. Stephen bought the girl everything she needed: clothes, groceries, school supplies, toys. He even enrolled her in music school. You used to play guitar a lot there. Why don't you play it anymore? Helen sighed. Yes, indeed, since her grandmother was gone, she had never played anything, simply because she wasn't in the mood. There was so much going on in her mind and soul. It was like a constant chaos. By the end of the day, the girl was so tired of her own thoughts, impressions, and emotions that she fell asleep like a cat. Was it up to her to play the guitar? But the words of her father made Helen remember her favorite instrument. The girl took the guitar, ran her fingers over the strings, and she immediately felt lighter, as if a warmth from the past began to smell. And why had she never guessed that music would soothe her? Do you want to go to music school? Her father suggested. Helen thought about it and agreed. From early years, she heard from others that she needed to go there, that in their small village, such a talent could not be fully revealed. That Helen needs competent teachers from the city? And here it is, the opportunity that everyone was talking about. It took a lot of effort for the father to get his daughter enrolled. First of all, the school year was coming to an end. Secondly, the school teachers were not satisfied with the age of the student. The girl was 10 years old, and the music school accepted her at the age of 6 or 7. But the father knew how to insist on his own. And so after only a couple of days after their conversation, the girl began to attend a new educational institution. The school was big, bright. It was not at all like their village house of culture, the interiors of which had not changed since the Soviet era. Everything was different here. Helen at first was even afraid of the new teachers. They looked too strict and aloof. But when the study began, the girl realized that she got exactly where she needed so much new knowledge, so many subtleties. Helen absorbed musical literacy like a sponge, and of course, made great strides. Very soon, teachers began to praise the diligent, talented student. It was very pleasant. The girl gradually settled in the city. She had new friends and girlfriends. True, such warm and almost kinship relations, as with the guys, no one has not formed. But it was not customary to make friends here at all, as it was great there anyway. Helen and her classmates went to the movies, and to the skating rink, to the pizzeria, and to entertainment centers. Sometimes they just walked around the park. Sometimes they gathered at someone's house. The birthdays of local children were not like in the village. They were not hearty gatherings of children and adults, but trips to a bowling alley, trampoline, or a center. The child was entertained by special people dressed in costumes, heroes, cartoons, animators. Interesting, of course, in some places, even fun. But every time Helen remembered her own heartwarming, full of sincere hugs. Birthdays. They were organized for her granddaughter by her loving grandmother. How Helen missed and longed for her. It was not the first great loss in her life. But the girl's mother did not know her, was not used to her, and therefore was not too worried about her absence. Grandmother was a different matter. With her father, the relationship was polite, even, but something strained, clumsy. Even he tried to be involved as a parent. But it didn't work. He wasn't interested in his daughter's thoughts and experiences. He didn't understand her at all. Helen did not feel even a small part of the love and warmth that her grandmother gave her, and it was very hard. The girl literally froze. It was good that there was music in her life. Helen saved herself by picking up a guitar and dissolved its melodic sound. She played what the teachers assigned. She also picked up songs she liked or composed something of her own. With the help of sounds, the girl spilled out her emotions, longing for her grandmother and her former life, anxiety, desire to be closer to her father, the only relative now. Music was relaxing. It calmed me down, helped me feel more confident. Time passed. The life of the small family was gradually getting better. Stephen was surprised to discover that his daughter could cook perfectly well. It was unexpected. The children of his acquaintances of that age could not hold a knife in their hands and were considered almost babies. Helen, on the other hand, was adept with all kitchen tools. And in her younger years, she baked mind-boggling pies and cooked flavorful borscht. When the girl first made her and her father a delicious dinner from the leftovers found in the refrigerator, the man was mesmerized. Returning from work, even at the entrance to the entranceway, he caught the aroma, from which he began to salivate profusely. But it could not have occurred to Stephen that these odors were coming from his apartment. "What's all this about you?" Stephen marveled as he entered the apartment. "Or did someone come to see us?" "It was me," smiled Helen. She liked the look of amazement on her parents' face. "My grandmother taught me." Grandma had indeed taught her granddaughter the art of cooking from a young age. When Helen was still a little girl, she used to help her knead dough. And becoming a little older, the girl learned to wield a knife. As a skilled hostess, she even liked to cook. It's almost like music, a real art. Now Helen often cooked for their little family and did it with great pleasure. She liked to see how eagerly her father devoured her culinary masterpieces. The relationship between the daughter and her father gradually improved. Yes, the adaptation was not easy and very long. It was a lot of work for both of them. But in the end, Helen got what she wanted: warmth and care of her favorite native man. It did not happen at once, not suddenly. Father's heart defended gradually. The icy crust binding him first gave cracks, then slowly fell away, crumbled. One day, Stephen found it interesting to talk to his daughter. She has become quite mature, sensible, and her life is rich, filled with events and impressions. Now the father looked at his daughter very differently. Helen felt it and was glad of the change. Her father was no longer withdrawn. When he came home from work, Stephen now shared with his daughter his plans for the future and news from work. Father and daughter went on several vacations, just like Grandma had asked them to. Stephen showed Helen the big cities. The girl marveled and admired, looking around. And Stephen genuinely enjoyed her reaction. These were such wonderful trips. Helen found out that her father was a very intelligent and erudite man. He was knowledgeable in a wide variety of fields: architecture, history, archaeology, culture, and enjoyed sharing that knowledge with his daughter. The first summer after her grandmother passed away, Helen came to the village with her father. The man prepared the house for the long absence of the owners, closed the window shutters, bought furniture, threw out unnecessary junk from the attic and from the basement. Stephen also found some real treasures: Huffy albums with photos that his grandmother had so carefully kept. Here was the entire family history from Grandma and Grandpa's ancestors to Helen. This archive my father took home to the city apartment. Getting the house ready took only a couple days. During this time, Helen felt as if familiar and native places had come back in time. Smiling neighbors, old friends who missed her so much. When her father told the girl it was time to go back, Helen even had tears in her eyes. "How can we go back? We've only been here for a short time. But I have to go to work and I'm done with all my business. Why would we stay?" The father hadn't gotten to know his daughter very well. He couldn't understand the girl's feelings. But David, of course, knew right away. "Let her stay with me." At least for a couple of weeks, the old man said to Stephen, "My granddaughters are here. They have been friends since birth. The three of them miss each other. They will walk to the river in the woods, run fresh air, breathe. It's a blessing. It's better than girls in a stuffy concrete box all day long. While you're at work. That's weird." Stephen stretched out uncertainly. "Are you an idiot, Dim? As if she's nobody." "What do you mean, nobody?" The old man was indignant. "She's like a third granddaughter to me. From now on, I'm not going to finish her." These words of the elderly neighbor echoed warmly in Helen's heart. She begged, still looking at her father to spend at least a few weeks in her favorite village in the company of her best friends. This is happiness, after all. Father agreed. Helen jumped for joy, and Kathy and Maria jumped with her. It was a wonderful time. It was the same as always. Playing with friends, staying out late, familiar places, neighbors who had known you since birth. Except that Grandma wasn't around her house, looked out onto the road, warded up places in them. Sadness periodically squeezed the girl's heart. The surrounding people sensitively caught these changes, Helen's moods, and tried to support her. It was easier for the girl with them. And then the father came for his daughter, and everything was over. Helen cried as she left for the city. Her friends and girlfriends hugged her. David stroked the girl's head, but nothing. Yes, and the dampness lower in the back. You're not going away forever. Here will be your fall vacation. Father will bring you here to rest. We all welcome you here. Helen understood that the elderly neighbor was not just saying that to make a point. She was really always welcome at Petrovka. Realizing this simple truth made it easier and warmer on the soul. But Helen never came to the village for the vacations again. Soon after her departure, David was hospitalized. A stroke. He pulled through then, but he could no longer live alone in the village. David was taken in by his daughter, Maria, and Kathy's mother. The family lived in another town. So Helen never saw her childhood friends or her kind neighbor again. Another blow of fate, another one. Be that as it may, the girl still got used to the new reality. Relations with her father became more cordial and warm. The everyday life got better. Life was not so bad. At least, next to Helen was always a native person, ready to support him and listen. And the girl appreciated it. But the father, he more and more often talked about the fact that he wants to return to the sea. You see, this is my element: waves, wind, sea air, and space. Nothing for miles around. It takes my breath away. Helen understood. She knew exactly what it was like when your heart started to pound joyfully at the sight of your favorite landscapes. And we don't have enough money, Stephen lamented. Those who go on voyages are paid many times more. But here on the ground, the wages are different. Helen did not think they were in need. They had everything they needed, even more. They dressed beautifully, ate well, traveled. But my father still dreamed of more. We often reminisced about his former earnings. Well, I'm an adult now. Helen made a good point once. I'm 13. I've been going to school on my own for a long time. I've been cooking since I was a kid. Why don't you come back? I see how much you miss the sea, don't I? I can manage on my own. No, you're just a child. You can't be left alone for too long. I don't know what could happen. What could happen? Sincerely perplexed the girl. She felt independent enough to live a month or two alone. Yeah, it'll be boring without her daddy, but she'll be fine. The law says you can't be left alone. You're only 13. The neighbors will find out. They'll call child services. Yeah, the neighbors here are weird. Not like in the village, agreed Helen. How do you feel about having a nanny? Nanny Helen. Well, if I go on a voyage, you need someone to look after you. It won't be a babysitter for the kids, but more like a house manager. Your au pair, I don't need no au pair, muttered Helen. But she already realized that her father wouldn't leave her alone anyway, as she shouldn't. All right, hire your own at-home ruler, the girl waved her hand. Father decided to return to the sea, immediately perked up. Now he smiled and joked a lot. Stephen looked a perfectly happy man. Helen was happy to look at her parent, but also worried a little. What if she would not find common ground with this woman? What should look after her and the house? What if it turns out to be some nasty aunt? The search for the house by the ruler did not progress very well. Father contacted many agencies and called the ads himself, but he only came across nannies. For babies, it was pensioners or students, ready for a fee to spend a few hours a day with a small child. But to live together with a teenager and look after the apartment, no one agreed. However, my father did not give up hope of finding such a person. Who is looking, he will always find. Optimistically, he said to his daughter. After another setback, one day Stephen returned from a friend's birthday party in high spirits. It was late in the evening. Helen was sitting on a difficult math homework assignment. when her happy parents came up to her and announced that the whole matter was settled. What was settled the girl didn't understand. "I found a babysitter for you. I mean, the ruler of the house. That's an option. You can't even think of a better one." Helen was a little tense. After all, it was about her fate. "Could you be more specific?" the girl asked. And the father told his daughter the story of this fateful, as it would later turn out, encounter. Stephen had come to his buddy's birthday party. They had once graduated from university together, then even worked on the same ship. Later, the paths of old friends parted, but between them remained a warm, friendly relationship. It was Sam's anniversary. On this occasion, the man decided to roll a big celebration in a restaurant. Among the guests were many people whom Stephen saw for the first time. Among them was Adriana, an acquaintance of Sam's wife. The tall, slender woman looked beautifully stylish and tastefully dressed, smiling and friendly. At some point, Adriana and Stephen got to talking. Both of them had already had a few drinks and were relaxed. The evening moved into a phase of revelations. It was time for fascinating and frank life stories. It turned out that Adriana had recently divorced her husband. Or rather, according to the woman, her husband simply put her and her daughter on the street for a stupid quarrel. How could that man do that to his child? Stephen was outraged. "I have a daughter myself. Jenna is not his daughter," Adriana sighed. "She is my child from my first marriage. My husband, now ex-husband, could never accept another man's daughter. He never loved her." Adriana was in a desperate situation. Money for renting a place to live was woefully inadequate. The woman could not find a good job, as she had no education or experience. Adriana devoted herself to her husband and daughter. She looked after the house, cooked her husband delicious meals, organized the household. And he was a successful businessman, providing the family with money. Adriana felt quite happy and protected, but without realizing it, she was in a very vulnerable position, as she was completely financially dependent on her husband. "And now I am alone in such a poor situation, grabbing any part-time job to feed myself and Jenna. My parents have no help for a long time. A friend invited me to a party. She said that I need a little distraction from everything, that I still think about my problems all the time. Yes, and I thought I was in a hopeless situation." Stephen stretched out. "It's much harder for you, of course. I hope everything works out for you in the end. I'll try to help you with your work. It's kind of a secretary thing in our world. What happened to you?" Adriana let the potential job offer slip past her ears. A desperate situation. And Stephen told this jokingly beautiful woman about everything about the death of his beloved wife during childbirth, about the daughter, about the mother who raised the girl until she was 10 years old, about the difficulties of adapting to her own child. When suddenly Helen was left without the care of a loving grandmother, well, and about her dream, about the sea, of course. "I'm also looking for a nanny for my daughter, but no one agrees. People offer hourly babysitting services for kids, but no one wants to live with a teenager and look after the house." Adriana's eyes lit up at the submission from the man. "Don't you realize that our meeting today is not an accident?" The woman exclaimed. "It's just a miracle. The very act of bringing us together." Much later it would turn out that it was not Providence that brought Sterhepov and Adriana together. Jubilee's wife was aware of the situation of her husband's friend, and she really wanted to help her friend, who was in distress. The women purposely arranged for Adriana and Stephen to meet for the holidays. Both thought it was a wonderful outlet for both the woman and the single man. "How old is your child?" Adriana clarified. 13. "And my daughter Jenna is 15. I know how to raise teenage girls. I know how to approach them. I love talking to them. We're gonna make it work." Stephen thought about it. He needed a ruler at home. That was true. But he was counting on a professional employee of a specialized agency. And here was Adriana, and with a daughter. But on the other hand, time was running out. "We're about to go on a trip, and the problem's not solved yet. Your little girl is about to go through puberty. It's a very dangerous period. I know we have Jenna, and it's already been passed at this age. Children need special supervision, or else it's not far from trouble." Adriana spoke convincingly and looked confident. Stephen thought about it. Indeed, this woman has a lot of experience with children. She had a daughter a little older than Helen. The girls will be together. I wondered if they would find a common language. In addition, Adriana, real beauty, Stephen liked in her company. She was very disposable. After thinking about it, the man agreed. I think this is a great option, he smiled at Adriana, whom he liked more and more. A strong woman who had withstood many blows of fate without breaking her chassis. That was how she learned benevolence. Pleasant, intelligent, sensitive, right? Exactly the kind of person Stephen would want Helen to be around. Adriana and her daughter Jenna moved into Stephen and Helen's apartment. The man put them in the living room. There was plenty of room. Both Adriana and Jenna seemed nice and kind special to Helen at first. Wow, how cool is your hair? Jenna marveled, barely seeing the girl. Can I try to braid it for you? Helen shrugged. She'd never really cared much for her hair. She did a neat ponytail before school, and that was it. But Jenna had built on Helen's head a strong braid hairstyle, which incredibly found the girl. Helen admired her reflection in the mirror. Are you a beauty? Jenna smiled. You are, you too, mouthed Helen. Not that was the unadulterated truth. Both Jenna and her mother were real beauties, tall, slender, big eyes. The kind that always attracts attention, the kind that men always look at. And both Jenna and Adriana knew how to emphasize the advantages of appearance. They chose the right outfits, skillfully applied makeup, made beautiful and very stylish hairstyles. Helen at first perceived it all as magic. In her and her father's house, there was never any cosmetics, or filled with clothes, closets. The girl watched Adriana's movements mesmerized as she applied makeup in front of the mirror. Interesting, isn't it? The woman smiled, noticing the look, the girl's going. Sit down next to me. I'll show you how it's done. And in half an hour, Adriana made of a completely different person. In the mirror, the girl saw not herself, but a beautiful girl from Ruzel, whose eyes, a delicate blush on her cheeks and plump, doll-like lips. Magnificently admired. Always walk like that. But Helen couldn't always walk like that. Yes, beautiful, of course. But the feeling of makeup on the girl's face was not liked at all. And it was a shame about the time. First, the night and the makeup, then she washes it off. It could take an hour to do it all. Adriana and Jenna were giving Helen something she'd been missing. A woman's attention. They went shopping together and picked out outfits, gossiped. Discussing movies and stars before school, Helen now always flew Jenna. She did wonderful hairstyles, stylish, beautiful, comfortable. Adriana and Jenna also helped the girl with her closet. Your clothes are kind of teddy bear, cotton and gray. Not happy, Adriana declared. Inspected the girl's closet. At school, they don't allow to wear other things. Helen waved her hands. Somehow she hadn't thought about it at all before. Nonsense. You can always find something that will fit into the regulations and fit nicely. Jenna, I think we should go shopping. Are you coming? You have such great taste. We're gonna need your advice. Of course, I love shopping with you. Adriana and Jenna had indeed picked out things for Helen that made her look like a princess, revealing lace blouses, slightly shorter skirts, high-heeled shoes. Well, that's another thing, Adriana rejoiced. Looking over her ward, you have a wonderful figure. You are slender, long-legged. Why hide it all in a uniform and a hoodie? You should be wearing a sack of potatoes. Helen had never gotten so many compliments at school. For the first time in her life, she felt not smart, but really beautiful. And it was wonderful. Jenna became for Helen a real older friend, almost the sister she had always dreamed of having. She was older. Jenna told the girl about her relationships with boyfriends and girlfriends. It was so exciting that Helen would forget to even breathe. It was like a soap opera, only it was real. Jenna was a wonderful storyteller, and her speech flowed smoothly and measuredly. And Helen's eyes were filled with pictures of this beautiful girl's life. Helen admired Jenna. They were bantering again. Adriana came into their room. Come on, let's go to our movies and watch the pizza. Those were wonderful days. Helen felt part of the exquisite feminine world. The girl's father adored him, but he couldn't give her all that girlishness. It turned out that Helen needed that companionship. She hadn't even realized it before. When Adriana found out that Helen could cook well, she was absolutely delighted. "Wow," admired the woman, seeing how the girl takes out of the oven tray with pies. "It's you yourself, yes." "Not without pride," answered Helen. "My grandmother taught me. I've been doing it for a long time." Helen was bored with the food she had ordered from the restaurant, so she decided to treat Adriana and Jenna to some homemade pastries. "It's divine," praised Jenna, taking a big bite out of the pie. "I've never tasted anything like it, but it's bad for your figure." "At your age, it's no big deal," Adriana smiled. "But you, Helen, surprise me. You won't believe me, and I still haven't learned to bake. And you're so young, but you're already so good." Helen blossomed with these compliments. Now, to please Adriana and Jenna, the girl tried to cook something. Every day she actually did much better than Adriana. The woman's soups often turned out too runny and salty, and the skates constantly picked up from the top and didn't fit inside. That was why Adriana preferred to order takeout. Helen, on the other hand, had no trouble cooking dinner or lunch for the three of them. The girl did it gladly. Jenna and Adriana. They had taken such good care of her, taught her so much. And then my dad came back. Adriana and Jenna moved back into their rented apartment, and Helen was very upset by this fact. Helen missed now their heart-to-heart talks, trips to cafes and stores. The girl missed Adriana and Jenna, who had shown her a different side of life, one that Helen had not even suspected. Her father, of course, asked his daughter how life was in his absence. Helen described Adriana and Jenna in the most vivid colors. "They're so great. Can't you imagine?" She shared her impressions with her parent. "They're so interesting, so good." The father smiled. The girl could see that he was happy with her stories. A month passed, and Stephen was again sent on a voyage, this time for an even longer period than the first time. Again, Adriana and her daughter came to look after Helen. The time flew by. When did the father return? Adriana and Jenna hadn't gone anywhere. They stayed in the apartment, which Helen was incredibly happy about. The girl noticed, of course, that her father looked at Adriana in a special way. And the woman herself, though she tried to hide it, clearly sympathized with her employer. But Helen thought that it all seemed to her that she was just wishful thinking. Turns out she wasn't. Yes, it had been coming to that for a long time. Jenna looked at Helen like a small child as she shared her impressions of what was happening. There was no doubt it would happen. She was just a little wrong about the timing. "Well, yes, Jenna, she is so attentive." Experienced eye diamond at her father again came in the flight, after which they signed. They didn't have a big wedding, just the four of them at a restaurant. Helen was over the moon at the time. This beautiful, kind woman had joined their family. She's going to live with them now, giving Helen the feminine attention she so desperately needs. That's great. Helen had dreamed of something like this for a long time, but everything turned out much better than she could have imagined. Not only does she have Adriana, but Jenna, practically an older sister, a friend who knows so many interesting things. Everything changed as soon as father left on his voyage. The stamp in the passport dramatically transformed Adriana's relationship with her stepdaughter. Helen expected from her stepmother and half-sister the same behavior, care, heart-to-heart talks, joint walks. But all this stopped abruptly. Adriana went to friends and beauty parlors. Jenna also lived her own life. Friends, admirers, nightclubs. And Helen, she was all alone again. She was abruptly no longer paid attention to. The only thing the girls were praised for was cooking and cleaning. Helen single-handedly cleaned the entire apartment and cooked mind-blowing lunches and dinners just to earn Adriana's approval. She didn't realize what was going on. Her stepmother praised her discreetly and ordered new dishes for the next day. Sometimes Adriana also asked Helen to mop the floors. That was all the communication. Helen felt confused and cheated. "Jenna, tell me, how did you guys hang out at the club?" Addressed one day by a girl with a question to Jenna. Jenna absent-mindedly looked at Helen and answered nothing. When the girl repeated her question, Jenna sighed heavily and muttered, "What kind of bailiff are you? You're just a sticky little thing. You're impossible to be around." It was a blow to Helen. She thought she and Jenna were friends. The girl used to share details of her life with her. They talked a lot, went out together. Jenna gave Lena invaluable advice on makeup and the combination of clothing items. And now it's like this. More to come. Adriana had gotten into the swing of things. Helen was now in charge of the entire household. The stepmother did very little cooking in her husband's absence. It was the stepdaughter's responsibility. Cleaning was the same. If earlier the girl was at least praised for her help at home, now she received only remarks and reproaches if she did not have time to do something. And it was hard. Helen also had to study and go to music school. Of course, the girl's grades deteriorated. It is impossible to do all the housework and study well at the same time. Helen tried to explain to Adriana that she couldn't cope. I'm tired and I don't have time to study. Music has been skipped for the last time. Let Jenna cook and clean at least sometimes. That, my dear, is called laziness. Adriana looks around her face with an indifferent look. Nothing supernatural is required of you. Didn't you know that people who live together and household chores are shared equally? Evenly. That was a little out of line. There was no such thing as equal sharing. Jenna lived her life to the fullest, going out with friends, going on dates, shopping, and going to beauty salons. Sometimes the underage Jenna, even at night at home, and did not show up. Adriana would make phone calls. She periodically even drove somewhere at night to pick up a daughter. Only the father, he knew nothing about this side of Svetlana's life. Under him, the girl behaved impeccably. Jenna did absolutely nothing around the house. Even the bed for her had to be made by Helen. Jenna was preparing for final exams. Adriana declared in response to Helen's fair remark. At first, the girl was still trying to defend herself. You have only 2 more years to go, and she's already here. But Helen never saw Jenna with a textbook in her hands. The girl attended school reluctantly. She had a big problem with her studies. All she had on her mind was dating and partying, and she only cared about her own appearance. Jenna did not get out of the beautician from beauty salons. This, of course, gave its fruits. The girl looked just beautifully groomed, spectacular, stylish. Adriana's father spent the lion's share of the money left for the household on himself and his daughter. Helen, however, was left over on a residual principle. Adriana was only in the kitchen when her father was home. She created the image of the perfect housewife. The woman didn't work. She explained to her husband that the girls needed special care now, because they were at a difficult age and all that. An eye on the teenagers. During this period, Stephen agreed with Adriana's arguments. She was generally good at convincing others that her decisions were reasonable and beneficial to everyone. It was her talent. Stephen even sincerely believed that he himself offered his wife to take care of the house and children, and appreciated this, as he thought, Adriana's sacrifice. To put her career on the altar of happiness and well-being of the family, it's practically a feat. Adriana had a great influence on her father. He looked at her admiring eyes and believed every word of his wife, considered her perfect and infallible. Helen used to like this. She was happy for her own man. So many years alone. And now, at last, had found his love. But now the girl was hurt and even scared. Adriana was gradually turning from a kind and sensitive woman into a monster. Stepmother made ever higher demands on the colony. The girl was bombarded with reproaches every day. She cooks wrong, and she cleans too slowly and pays too much attention to nonsense. What do you want on that fool of yours? Adriana scornfully pointed her finger, decorated with impeccable manicure on the guitar. I already have a headache from your tedious songs. Helen was silent. She knew that if she opened her mouth and tried to defend herself, she would be bombarded with a torrent of insults. It was already past the point. It was better to keep silent. It would calm her stepmother down faster. And they didn't like Helen's passion for music. She repeatedly called the girl untalented, constantly asking her to play quietly, as if it was possible forced stepdaughter to skip lessons at music school. Only music, it was a real salvation for the girl. Playing calmed her down, relaxed her, gave her joy. After all, joy and already became too little in Helen's life. With her father, Adriana, of course, behaved very differently. Helen couldn't get used to it. Metamorphosis. A sensitive, anxious parent, a wonderful hostess, a loving wife. Her father often said how lucky he was to have met such a woman. Adriana slowly turned the man against his daughter. Carefully, delicately, masterfully, the woman disguised herself. She was presenting in front of Stephen, an exciting parent. Helen was going through puberty. She's become so snappy, lazy, hates everyone around her. She dropped out of school. She's not into it. All she can think about is going out and sneaking out of the house. That's what Adriana told her father. Not really caring that Helen didn't hear her conversation. The woman didn't care. The man wouldn't believe his daughter's words if she tried to justify herself. Adriana's influence was too strong. Too skillfully did the woman manipulate those around her. What was to be done? Puzzled, Stephen looked at his spouse. He was waiting for advice and help and support. Of course, the man loved his daughter and did not want her to slip into the abyss. Yes, Adriana used such figurative, vivid expressions to convince him. I think she should leave music school, the stepmother had once suggested. Helen spends too much time on nonsense and her studies suffer. I generally feel that under the label of music school, she is walking around in bad company. I talked to the music teacher. There's a lot of truancy there. Father, as usual, agreed with his wife. Her words were always decisive. When the man announced to his daughter that she would no longer study music, Helen immediately realized whose handiwork it was. It was the first time the girl openly objected. She defended her life's work and therefore suddenly became brave and determined. No, I don't want to quit music school. Adriana, she just wants me to spend more time at home and do all the housework. I cook, I clean, I do the laundry. I'm like a servant while you're away, you see. Adriana looked at her spouse and looked frustrated and worried while doing so. You see how she reacts. And all I was doing was teaching the child to work. It's no big deal. In all normal families, children have some small responsibilities. But Helen just wants to be out and about. That's dangerous at that age. Look at your daughter. Helen couldn't take it. Watch her. The girl couldn't take it. She snapped. It played right into their hands. She pretended to be an understanding woman who was not offended by the teenager's temper, but merely concerned about him, wishing him well. Helen had tried to complain to her father about Adriana before, but he hadn't taken her words seriously. What about his new wife? She's so perfect. You're just jealous. Stephen stroked his daughter's head. I'll try to pay more attention to you. Whatever Helen said, it didn't sound convincing. After all, her father was constantly being manipulated. Adriana is a skilled manipulator. And after this open argument, Helen's words had ceased to have any meaning for Stephen. At least the girl thought so. By the way, Helen still had to leave the music school. Her father insisted. The girl lost her only outlet. She did, of course, occasionally play for herself. It somehow relieved the stress Helen was now under all the time. From time to time, Adriana pitted father and daughter against each other to consolidate the effect. She played people like chess pieces. The father was at the mercy of his bewitching wife. He was in full confidence that Berta made a monster out of his sweet daughter and thanked fate that in this difficult period next to the girl is an experienced and attentive woman. At first, Helen still tried to get through to the parent. But every time after that, Adriana organized something new. Once Jenna took money from the family stash. Helen knew it. The girl had heard Jenna begging her mother for money for a trip with friends. She had refused her daughter, explaining that she didn't like the girl's company at all. But Jenna was not used to restrictions. She still went away, which made Adriana furious. She reprimanded her daughter on the phone, threatened her, and ordered her to return immediately. Of course, Jenna didn't think of obeying, not the kind of person she was. Of course, both Adriana and Helen understood where the girl took the money and Stephen's stash. But when the father returned, the stepmother blamed Helen for everything. Jenna was already home at the time and was portraying herself as a model high school student with acting ability. She took after her mother and perhaps even surpassed her. The father did not scold the daughter then? No. He had a long talk with her, trying to find out why the girl needed such a sum of money. Maybe she was in trouble. Maybe you need help. Helen tried to explain to her parent how things really were. He squeezed even harder as severe pains and begged her not to deceive him. "Tell the truth," asked the father, taking his daughter's hands. "What is going on with you?" Helen did not say anything more. It was useless. Her father thinks she is a troubled teenager capable of stealing. What can I say? Adriana's words proved to be a powerful tool. The man doesn't trust his daughter, but he takes his wife's every word at face value, and there was nothing the girl could do about it. Time passed. The moment of Svetlana's enrollment in the university was approaching. Helen realized that the girl would fail miserably. I wonder how her stepmother would explain it to her father. She had been working hard on her daughter's image all these years. Jenna appeared in her stories as a smart girl, a diligent student, a gifted girl. Adriana constantly compared the girls, and Jenna invariably resembled Helen in everything. But that's okay, Adriana urged her spouse. I raised one girl to be such a success. I can do the same with your daughter. I know how to raise girls at a certain age they need a firm hand. The father agreed with Adriana and with a light heart, gave her all the rights to raise Helen. You know best, don't you? He replied to his wife. Helen, she's kind of gotten used to that kind of life. Recriminations, ridicule, indifference, shifting on the shoulders of the teenager most of the household duties, limitation in everything. Helen sometimes felt like Cinderella. Adriana was the textbook stepmother. They say a fairy tale is a lie. It's a hint. And then, in her father's absence, Adriana was visited by William, a young man, stylishly dressed, always smiling and polite. The woman explained to the girls that he was a distant relative. But William looked at Adriana with such eyes that Helen realized her stepmother was lying. Jenna didn't believe her mother either. She smirked every time this guest appeared in the house. Now Adriana could afford not to come home at night. And Helen knew exactly what was going on. Already her stepmother had a lover, this very William. Young, handsome, charming in love. The girl felt bad for her father. He trusts his wife so much. And the girl also tried to understand why Adriana needed this man. After all, stepmother did not do anything for nothing. If she approached a man, it was only to get something from him. And William didn't appear in Adriana's life by accident. Maybe it was just a matter of feeling. A man, he's handsome, reminiscent of model boys in magazines. Even Svetka is giving him a special look. Helen, trying to tell your father what's going on. Careful. She also told him about the man who sometimes comes to their house and has become the norm from Adriana. Father frowns. You are telling the truth and trying to smear Adriana again. Are you always fighting? Dad, it's the truth. Almost screamed the girl. She felt that her father did not believe her completely, but still a grain of doubt, she and his soul wounded. Of course, Stephen talked to his wife. She told him about the relatives who had come from out of town for a while, and then began to complain again about Helen, who was lying and arguing with everyone just out of a desire to protest. Helen heard every word her stepmother said. The girl clenched her fists in impotent anger. Adriana looked and sounded as always, quite convincing. Not like she herself was a resentful adult girl with problematic behavior. Stephen didn't know what to do. Leave his dream job again and go back to the big land. But it's going to be even harder to do that now. All the same, he supports not only himself and his daughter, but also 2 people took on the responsibility, so he must adequately provide for the family. Helen completely out of control. I guess she needs her father around. But how to leave the ship? Earn very little now, not an option. Adriana charming, delightful, intelligent, subtle. Stephen lost his head for this woman at first sight. They met just in time for a mutual friend's anniversary. And then it turned out that Adriana and Stephen could help each other. It was like a jigsaw puzzle. At first, Helen was delighted with her stepsister's stepmother. Her daughter's eyes lit up with a happy fire. She was so excited to have Adriana and Jenna move in with them. Then, as they left for their voyage, Stephen was calm. His daughter was in good hands. Coming home was much more pleasant too. How happy is it to have a woman you love waiting impatiently for you? And such a beautiful woman. Stephen had forgotten it could be like that. The man invited himself, and then Helen went through that notorious age of transition. The child was like a substitute. The girl was now lazy and snapping, lying, and skipping school. She tried to argue with her stepmother and father. She was making up stories about Kathy and Jenna, reacted inappropriately to ordinary requests, and once even took a decent sum from the family piggy bank. I wonder what that kind of money was for. Stephen was afraid that his daughter had fallen in with bad company, especially since Adriana thought so too. Helen was always complaining about her stepmother. No wonder. That's how her stepdaughter was raised, restricted her freedom and the horror of having to clean up after herself, much nicer. Lazy all day long, not bothering with lessons and household chores. To live at one's own pleasure. Of course, Adriana was now in the girl's way, so she was pissed off. Stephen understood this, but did not know how to help his daughter through this difficult age with the least possible loss. He never understood Helen at all. It's a pity that in the maternity hospital together with the child is not given a manual for its operation. Now Helen had overstepped the mark. She hinted that Adriana had a lover, William. Her spouse did not lean, indeed, her relative, who had recently moved to their town. A busy young man who had never found time to get to know Stephen was visiting them. Working hard, trying to make her way in this life. But Helen, she assures her that Adriana is a lying monster and that William and her lover. Stephen stares into his daughter's honest eyes and is horrified. Had Helen really become a deceiver? It was so unlike her. That's when the man decided to install a hidden surveillance camera in the apartment. He's going to record it. The clips will be streamed online to his phone. On his next visit, he'll provide Helen with proof. She'll see the footage. She'll realize how stupid and ugly her attempts to smear her look. Adriana might throw something else at her head, and the girl will come to her senses. Nothing like a sobering look at yourself from the outside. Stephen didn't expect to see this at all. At first, he was still feeling guilty, peeking at the homies. It's like he doesn't trust them. He's good, I'll give you that. But record it. The footage the camera broadcast turned his mind upside down. Adriana really did treat Helen like a servant. She looked at her with contempt. She made the girl work for the whole family, and these were impossible chores for a teenager. Helen didn't just clean up after herself and run errands. She maintained cleanliness in the whole house, drives plumbing, cooked lunches and dinners. And all she got for it was reproaches and insults. No, when Stephen was home, Adriana didn't act like that. The man couldn't believe his eyes. It made his heart bleed. When Helen appeared to him as a disenfranchised Cinderella, so Adriana really was lying to him all the time, with those honest and loyal eyes. Helen, no matter how many times she tried to get through to her father, he wouldn't believe a word her daughter said. How awful. Poor girl. If he could. A man would now travel hundreds of kilometers and protect his daughter. Oh my. With his own hands, he made his own child's life a nightmare. And yet the girl came to him for help. But Stephen didn't believe her. Her daughter's words sounded like pathetic excuses. Helen's stories about William were also confirmed. Indeed, a young man sometimes came to their house, and he hugged Adriana in a very unrelated way. Sparks were flying between Adriana and William. The camera was quality. Stephen heard every word the couple said. William turned out to be an experienced and not cheap lawyer. Adriana did not have enough money for his services, so she went the usual way, using her strongest charms. Yes, Adriana and William were lovers. The young lawyer must have been influenced by the woman's natural magnetism, and she was certainly pursuing her own agenda. Stephen soon realized what it was: a plot of land in the village. Stephen's mother had left the house and garden as an inheritance to her granddaughter. Adriana knew this and was looking for a way to sell the property. She needed the money. Jenna, women's native daughter, would not have entered the university on a budget. The girl never asserted herself by studying. Miracles, as we know, do not happen. Therefore, Adriana needed a decent amount of money, which would be enough to pay tuition for Jenna. The woman knew very well that Stephen, no matter how much he was in love with her, would never agree to such a thing. That was why she needed William. As the guardian of Helen and Adriana, had the right to dispose of her stepdaughter's property until she came of age. The woman was going to pull off a scheme, sell the house on Petrotha, and the proceeds of the money to pay for Svetlana's education. But Stephen was not to find out about it. William, as an experienced lawyer, he helped his mistress in this case. Adriana, as no one knew how to manipulate people. Realizing what was happening, Stephen clenched his fists in impotent anger. Leonia cannot be left next to these terrible people. One thing before the end of the flight is still a lot of time. It is difficult to interrupt the business trip, but Stephen will do it. Helen is in danger. Helen struggled to hold back her tears. Not enough for Jenna to see how hard it is for her. She and her mother are deliberately driving her to breakdowns. The girl had made ugly scenes in front of her father more than once because she couldn't hold it in any longer. That played into the stepmother's hands. Now, Adriana has accused Helen of vagrancy. The stepmother is diligently creating an image in her father's eyes of a daughter who is a maverick, rude, and lazy. Now here's more. Helen only had a sleepover at a friend's house. She warned Adriana about it on the phone. Do whatever you want. The stepmother said indifferently into the phone, I don't care. Of course she didn't care. The day before, Helen had given the whole apartment away and cooked for a couple days. Otherwise, the stepmother wouldn't let her out of the house. Returning home the next morning, Helen found police officers in the apartment. At first, the girl thought it was Jenna. She often disappeared at night. Adriana periodically went to get her daughter out of trouble. The policeman asked Adriana if she had found the missing person. She nodded her head, and then the girl realized what was wrong. The stepmother had reported to the police that her underage stepdaughter had not come home for the night, even though she knew exactly where she was. I warned you that I would stay at my friend's house. Helen stretched out his stepmother in amazement. The girl had already guessed that the woman had thought of a new way to make her stepdaughter look like a troubled teenager. This time involving the police. Are you cheating again? The woman exclaimed. What am I going to do with you? One more trick like that, and we'll put her on the register, the official warned as he left the apartment. A record. Maybe that's what the stepmother wanted. And now Helen was trying not to cry from the hook on her bed. The girl hugged the bear, given to her once, and realized that she would be made out in front of her father as a missing girl again. And he, as always, will unconditionally believe his wife will look at his daughter with sad, anxious eyes. That look of pain and disappointment. And it's hard to bear. Suddenly a key turned in the door. Helen was startled. Who could it be? Jenna and Adriana. At home, her father would be at sea for another 3 weeks. Had Adriana really given the key to this William of hers? That was all that was missing. But father's voice came from the hallway. I'm home. You're back so soon. Adriana's voice sounded confused and lusciously happy at the same time. What happiness! I know everything. Father clearly did not share his wife's enthusiasm. I've seen and heard everything. Pack your things. You have until tonight. You won't do anything else. Nothing to my daughter. Helen's heart hammered like a caged bird. She rushed into the hallway and hung around her father's neck as he found out everything. That Helen would find out later. Right now, it didn't even matter. Stephen held his daughter in a tight embrace. He smelled of the sea. Everything will be all right now. Sentenced the man. I'm sorry for not believing you. I won't let anyone hurt you again.
Subscribe and click the bell.
When the neighbor Aunt Clara asked if Lisa could spend the night alone tonight, she had to be honest and admit that she couldn't. It was scary to look at her grandmother's empty bed, but it was impossible not to. Silence rang around, silence to the point of ringing in my ears. Who invented this omen to stop the clock in the house when a person dies in it? My grandmother loved her antique clocks, their slightly rustling sound. When Grandma brought little Lisa here, the clock had been here for a long time. Lisa cried the first night. Grandma sat on her bed and quietly comforted her. You see, you and I are going to make a good life together, like girlfriends. I've chosen the coziest corner for your bed. Doesn't the clock bother you? You can hear it rustling in your ear. Lisa quietly pushed the pendulum and cried silently. It couldn't be that Grandma was gone. When her 6-year-old had been told that Mommy and Daddy were dead, she hadn't believed it for a very long time. They must be somewhere now, which means they'll be here someday. That's why she flatly refused to leave their common home. She doesn't even remember why she agreed. Probably her grandmother had managed to persuade her in some miraculous way. Grandmother was so skillful. At first, Lisa was still terribly afraid that she would be taken away by some of the strangers who appeared in the house after Mom and Dad disappeared. There wasn't a single evil person among them. It was just that they were all complete strangers to her. She was afraid to even cry in front of them, let alone answer their questions. When they asked her something, she did not just keep silent, but turned away just in case. That way they would get away from her faster, stop noticing her. One day some aunt pestered her. She told her that she had to go to kindergarten tomorrow, and Lisa turned away and looked at the front door, pretending not to hear anything. Instead of Lisa, the aunt answered some incomprehensible nonsense, their neighbor Camille, with a purple curly head. She had long ago been promised to be taken far away to another town to visit her grandmother. And now Grandma had come on her own and turned out to be just that. Daddy never lied. Having met her grandmother, Lisa immediately stopped being afraid of all the terrible fears. It turned out that she and Grandma had no one but each other. Lisa was glad when she learned that it would be just the two of them. How nice that it's just you and me, Grandma, with no strangers. Grandpa would have loved you very much too. You can be sure of that. Granny smiled. She wasn't very happy that it was just the two of them. There were lots of pictures of Grandpa in the house, but all in albums, and only one on the wall. It showed both a young and dark-haired uncle, cheerful and strong, sitting in a boat, and on his lap he held a little boy, a little older than Lisa, and the boy was very serious, frowning and gripping the oars tightly. Lisa recognized right away that this boy was her daddy. They had pictures of him as a child at home, too. Grandma said that here they were on a fishing trip. It had been some very fishy summer, and they had had a terrific vacation. And in the early fall, 2 days after returning from vacation, Grandpa was killed in the line of duty. Little Lisa was afraid to ask what that execution was, and Grandma wouldn't explain. Further family history, sad but also beautiful in some ways, Grandma revealed to Lisa later. James, her dad, grew up and went to Washington, D.C. to study. To his mom's delight and relief, he had absolutely no desire to follow in his father's footsteps, no attraction to any dangerous service, and simply enrolled as a design engineer. Thoughtful and focused James, very suitable for this specialty. Everyone around him thought so too. No one expected from the guy no adventures. But he did. He fell in love with a girl from a wealthy family. And he didn't just fall in love for a while, he really fell in love. He was like that about everything. And the girl, Emily, Lisa's mom, turned out to be the same way. Both mother and stepfather were sure that sooner or later she would marry the son of a family friend, with whom the stepfather had a business partnership. The guy was really very shallow, had been educated in England, had returned, and was making a significant contribution to his father's business. He was in his late 30s. Financial prosperity was in sight. Why not get married? Mom and stepfather, at first quietly, and then more and more frankly and firmly, began to push the student to a profitable, prosperous marriage. At first she shrugged it off, probably too carefully and for a long time, so that the family had time to realize that her refusal, is not a capricious, spoiled princess. But it was also time to speak seriously. Emily slightly audibly inhaled, exhaled noisily, and announced, "The thing is, I have another fiancé." "Who is he?" Mom asked languidly, secretly hoping that the beautiful daughter went into her and knows how to find the best of the possible. And Mom was disappointed, extremely disappointed. The groom turned out to be a young engineer, yesterday's graduate, who found a job in an old construction firm. Much is decided by the family, but also the groom's mother, the widow of some provincial cop. And this for this almost country bumpkin of a boy, his mom has raised Emily? Her Emily, with clear skin, a chiseled profile, and the softest green, almond-shaped eyes. Love? But I had love too. I loved marrying your daddy, who got involved in an obscure project and left you and me penniless. If it wasn't for Michael, you would have grown up in a dormitory. That's how my mom met my daughters. Michael's mom's husband and Emily's benefactor was brief. "You will marry Sebastian," long ago agreed. Mom was afraid of his weighty statements. Emily, for some reason, wasn't. She married her James, and her parents kept their promise, cut her out of the family. Especially since they had another girl growing up, little Kelly. Their shared daughter with Michael was surely more successful and promising than this Emily, who had inherited stupidity from her father. Grandma Lisa said, "I am passing on to you the way your mother told me, adding nothing of myself. If you want to, you can always look up your mother's side of the family. I once thought it was wrong that they weren't told of your birth, but when your parents died, my matchmakers were notified. Just know that just in case, and decide for yourself." There was nothing to decide. No one had come for Lisa except Grandma Wendy, so she had no family anymore. Now Grandma Wendy was gone, so no one at all alone in the whole wide world, unless it's Kevin. "Lisa, you knew Grandma was sick." "Yes, I realize, of course, old. I have a mother a little younger than your grandmother, as you know. But a sick heart is a sick heart. You can't help it. You have to move on, not mourn endlessly." That was Lisa's consolation, Kevin. He convinced me to go to Washington. What's there to catch? He's a novice car mechanic, but he's already a good one with great reviews. If Lisa rents out her and Grandma's apartment, and he adds his savings, and then gets a job quickly, they'll rent a small apartment in Washington, in a residential neighborhood, and then they'll have something to live on. Remember I told you about my ideas before, but you were so afraid to leave your grandmother. You were glued to her, and now you have nothing to hold you here. Now Lisa really had nothing to hold on to. She wouldn't dare go alone to a strange, unfamiliar city. But Washington, D.C., her mom's hometown. Plus she'd have Kevin around to keep her company. Aunt Clara shook her head. "Oh, I don't know, of course. I'll help her rent the apartment. I'll control the tenants, but it's such a penny, barely enough for a room in Washington. There's a different price of living there, everything. You're just out of college. You got zero experience. You're not gonna find a job. What are you gonna live on? At least you're at home here. And I'll always pour you a bowl of soup if you need it." "Oh, Aunt Clara." Lisa waved her off. "It's just the two of us. Kevin has thought of everything, made some savings, and he'll find a job with his qualifications right away. We'll certainly live no worse than here. He realizes that he'll have to rely on him for the first time." Aunt Clara waved her hand back and forth, got up from her chair, walked around the room. All this in silence, and finally she said, "Your business, Lisa. Grandmother's apartment is only yours, and in this sense there is nothing to be afraid of. But I don't like these fashionable civil marriages without marriage license. I'm old-fashioned. It is for guys good and convenient, All these let's live see, something will not suit, we'll split up and share nothing, and that so at least every year with a new life? What's good for us girls? Not a wife, not a fiancé, just a temporary trial. And what hope is there for such a husband? Well, if he had settled in the city himself, created a base, and then dragged you along with him. But no, he decided to stick to his grandmother's apartment to make his life easier. Maybe you'd be fine here. It's your own place anyway, and we're all our own people. And Grandma Wendy would probably say the same thing. You know as well as I do. The tactless mention of grandmother might have been taken offense at, but Lisa took no offense. Grandma would have understood. Convincingly, she replied. Of course, Grandma Wendy would understand. She understood a lot more about relationships than the other grown-up aunts. Lisa knew that for some reason. The other thing was that if Grandma had been alive, Lisa wouldn't have dared to move so far away from her. But now, it didn't matter anymore. It was as if the stars had taken it upon themselves to help Lisa with Kevin. Surprisingly enough, they found a decent long-term tenant, a young couple with a baby boy. Lisa prepared in advance, disassembled, and neatly stacked the grandmother's wrinkled things, gave them to Aunt Clara for safekeeping. She took only her watch with her, sent it to her suitcase in a cozy box, lovingly nestled between her warm sweaters. They're so bulky, Lisa. Why carry them around with you? Kevin wondered. They took up half my suitcase. I'm going to hang them in our rented apartment so I can have something of my own. Well, if that's the way you want it, let them be. Kevin graciously agreed. In Washington, too, everything was going according to the planned scenario. They quickly found a studio apartment for the right price and a job for Kevin. True, the apartment was very cramped and nowhere further from the subway, and the job was on the opposite end of the city. But that didn't matter much if you didn't pick on the little things. Lisa put things on the shelves in the closet, hung a clock on her grandmother's wall, walked around the stores near the house, boiled some borscht, and sat down at her laptop. She should have been looking for a job, too. Of course, she has no experience, but in college she took first places in hairdressing creative competitions, and she has diplomas, and she agrees to the most modest salary, only if there was an opportunity to gain experience. Coming from work, Kevin several days in a row forced the same picture. A clean apartment, lunch on the stove, a focused Lisa, frowning her forehead, sending out her resume to salons. Lisa, don't dwell on it. From the outside, you'd think that I'm not able to provide for you, reproach you, and drive you to work. And everything is 200 times wrong. You don't have to work at all, at least as long as we're renting at this price. And if they raise the price, you can raise the price for your tenants. No, I can't do that. Lisa sighed honestly. She told him. It was hard enough for her to rent out her and her grandmother's apartment. She could only console herself with the fact that Miranda and Charles were very nice guys, and their son David, a wonderful, cheeky big guy who liked to smile and sing songs in his crib. She couldn't let anyone worse live in their apartment, and she wouldn't be able to raise the price of these people. Fool, you're still a little girl, my favorite fool. Kevin grinned patronizingly, hugging her. All right, I'll take care of the problems myself. But I need you not to be busy and tired, but to wait for me at home with lunch. I'm really so tired in this car service that if you will also come crawling, the same from some beauty salon, then on only bought dumplings I will not live long. I'm not quite used to it yet, and to get anything done, I need to step up my game. Stay at home, Lisa. It'll be easier and better that way. You've got it all set up like it's our own apartment, and you can walk around town half the day so you don't get bored while I'm working. Other girls dream of having a boyfriend to support them, and you want to work, capricious. Lisa was embarrassed. It's true, she's like a little girl. She'll earn 3 cents and deprive her Kevin of a fresh lunch and dinner every day. If they don't throw their money around, they can get by. It's not like she's going to the theaters and concerts. That's fine. They'll get along just fine without her earnings. Summer came, and Kevin's conviction that she had no need to work came in handy. Although the summer was cool and windy, with frequent rain, it was still a beautiful summer. The city didn't seem so uncomfortable and gray to Lisa when the shady greenery in the parks grew. One day Lisa went to the museum, and without noticing it she spent 3 o'clock there. She told Kevin at home at dinner and suggested, "Why don't we go together again this weekend? I didn't have time to see and memorize everything there, and then we'll go somewhere else. Why did we come here if we can't see anything?" "Lisa, I came here to earn, not to spend." Kevin explained condescendingly, "I can see it all later if I want to." Kevin worked hard and saved money for some important plans, which she promised to tell about later. Kathy, the neighbor on the floor, with whom Lisa managed to make a friendly relationship. She thought she was unlucky with Kevin, Lisa. He's a hard worker, he's determined beyond his years, he'll bring everything into the house, you can see that. You know how infantile guys are these days. Take my Ethan. We already have a 2-year-old son. What matters to my husband is his friends, his company. Friends are the center of the world. They should always rush to help at the first call, and it doesn't matter that his wife had other plans. She is not bored with the child, the son always cheerful. They're all selfish, most of them, so you've got a good one. Although you're pretty, Lisa, you could have found a better one, someone not stingy, who would take you everywhere, but not a fact. So yeah, if you're not picky, you're pretty good. Lisa, after Kathy's words about options, it was even kind of embarrassing to tell her that she lacked something. She had a very different idea of their life in D.C. It seemed to her that they had been together for 100 years, and Kevin had stopped loving her truly like he used to. He comes home from work tired, often irritable over nothing, collapses on the couch waiting for food, and looks at Lisa as something that has always been there, is there, and will always be there, like a central heating radiator, for example. At night, though, he changes, especially before the weekend. He remembers that there are affectionate words, promises that he will definitely think of something interesting for the vacation. Probably, it's really about fatigue, about worries. We'll be able to achieve something in a foreign city, in a megalopolis? To get accustomed here? Of course, it's hard to work alone for 2 people. Everything is getting more expensive. Soon the landlord will hint at an increase in rent. We'll have to find a job for ourselves. Kevin will grumble at first, but then he'll realize it's better. And she'll have no time to be bored and think of silly things. And it will be interesting, because the hairdresser is a man of art, no matter how much her favorite one giggles about it. Lisa thought about it. She consulted with Kathy and decided to try a different job search tactic. Nothing comes of sending out resumes listing kids' college pageant prizes when you have no experience at all. There are probably 1,000 of these same girls, 1,000 of resumes being sent out at the same time. Go on your own in the neighborhood salons. Varies advice. An old method, but in your profession can work. A hairdresser has to make you feel at ease. When I first saw you, I thought we were lucky. The neighbor rented an apartment to a very nice girl. So walk around, smile, socialize. Maybe that'll help. In an expensive luxury salon, so from the street, of course, will not take. But in the barber shop, as in our neighborhood, very even. And Lisa, having hardly waited for Kevin to leave for work, went to look for happiness. There were plenty of salons and establishments under the modest sign of a hairdresser's shop, even in walking distance. 4 salons did not show the slightest interest in her. But in a tiny, modest semi-basement under the glamorous name of Orchid, bored full brunette, after a short survey Lisa revived. "Oh, I need a replacement. My shifter is not a bad girl, but she has a stormy personal life and responsibility is not her thing at all. A word from another planet. She has to be replaced all the time. The owner doesn't care which one of us works, as long as it's not at a loss, but I'm really sick of this unpredictability, and it's useless to talk. I can tell you're different. If I put the owner on the spot, it's either me or Jenna, he'll ask her, because he knows exactly who's worth what. He doesn't pay much, so he doesn't have the nerve to expect a super master. It's just convenient for me that I live on the floor above our salon. I would have looked for something better a long time ago, but it's convenient to run from here, to take my daughter home from school. Contingent we also local, for years the same grandmothers and aunts, the requirements without much fantasy. I'm sure you've been practicing on the same neighbors back home." "Yeah. Well, nothing unexpected. Leave Lisa's cell phone number. I'll be sure to call you when I hop up to introduce myself to our Benjamin. My name is Nancy. I promised to get him ready." Lisa liked Nancy and her confidence was reassuring, but for some reason the air in the semi-basement seemed somehow stuffy, sickly sweet. Then dizziness and nausea set in under her throat. She said a polite goodbye and hurried outside, where she barely made it to the far corner of the house before vomiting into the grass. She felt a little better, but suddenly she felt weak, as if all her strength had gone at once. Lisa was a little frightened and decided not to go home, but first to Kathy. "Kathy, maybe I'll get a job, but it's a long shot," she said from the doorstep. "Are you so pale?" Kathy marveled, barely looking at her face. "Oh, I may have poisoned myself." Lisa sighed and told her what had happened to her. Kathy shook her head thoughtfully. "I don't want to frighten you, but it's better to check and rule out assumptions. I have a test in my medicine cabinet somewhere." "What kind of test?" "I don't get it, Lisa." "Are you 100% sure you can't be pregnant?" "Then I'm jealous. I'm jealous of Kathy." "Do you think we're from the middle of nowhere?" Lisa smiled. "Of course we are, Kevin." Lisa wasn't used to discussing such things with anyone, so she didn't explain further. "Yes, I believe every word you say." Kathy nodded. "When people tell me how handsome Robert is, I respond. What do you want?" "It's electronically verified. We planned for later, 5 years from now, but he had his own way." "Here, I found the test, and don't think about all the horrors beforehand. Maybe there's nothing, or maybe there is, but everything will be fine." Why hadn't she thought to ask Kathy how best to break the news? Hinting was stupid. It should be straightforward, only at the right moment, not on the doorstep, but when Kevin had eaten dinner and had had a little rest. Lisa waited until nightfall, and when the lights went out, she said in a half whisper, "Kevin, I'm pregnant." "That's for sure. The smell in the barber shop made me sick. Kathy, she gave me a test, and it showed 2 stripes. Lisa, don't joke about that." Kevin said sweetly, "You know I don't accept such stupid jokes, I'm serious." Kathy told me that they had Robert as well, in spite of the arrangements. It's not that uncommon. No method can be completely 100% trusted. Lisa didn't know what to say next. She fell silent, and silence hung. Only the grandmother clock rustled on the wall. Why is Kevin silent as well? Is he gathering his thoughts? Now he would hug her, say, "Don't worry, Lisa, we'll grow up. You found a problem, I'll fix it." It must have been half an hour before Lisa decided to speak again. "Kevin, I'm scared when you're so quiet. Lisa, I don't want to say it's your fault, So go to the doctor tomorrow and find out how much it costs to get it out quickly. And I'll give you whatever you need from my savings." She heard some completely alien voice. Lisa reached a shivering, suddenly frozen hand over her head, fumbled for the switch on the wall sconce, and turned on the light, as if she wanted to make sure it was her Kevin next to her. It was him, and he shaded the light with his hand. "What else are you going to do to me?" "Lisa, you're not hysterical. Are you going to tell me you want a baby?" "But that's nonsense. Why do we need one, especially now?" Lisa tried to catch his eye, but he averted his gaze with his palm and curved his mouth. She suddenly regained the ability to speak. "I didn't want anyone, because I didn't think about it. I can't abort. If there's already a child, I'll love it. My grandmother told me my father was happy when he found out I was coming, even though he and my mom didn't have anything going on at the time. He just loved her very much. So he loved their baby right away, which was me. Of course, your daddy's the noble knight, and I'm the scoundrel. Did you ever think that he hoped to make peace with his rich wife's family by having a child? No? That's life, baby." Lisa silently slicked her feet into her flip-flops, went into the kitchen and cried, resting her head on the table. Was her daddy counting on something or not? He still couldn't, so to speak. Quick. Clean it up. She knows for a fact he couldn't have. She carried with her, behind her passport cover, a small photograph of James and Emily squatting, holding the handles on either side of a tiny little girl in a crimson jumpsuit, just now learning to walk. "Daddy, Mommy, there's no one else to support me." Lisa Wells stopped crying. I heard a good-natured voice above me. "Go to sleep tomorrow. If you're afraid, I'll take you to the doctor myself." "Well, I'm sorry about that. Soon you won't even remember about it." "I'm not getting rid of the baby." "Of course you're in favor of creating poverty. I could have guessed that when you were picking up stray cats with kittens, only I'm not a stray." Lisa interrupted him quietly. "Listen, let's get some sleep, calm down, and then we'll talk intelligently in the morning. I'm tired as a dog at work, and here at home Brazilian cereals. I'm gonna go to a friend's house for the night. If you want to talk without drama, call me." Lisa watched in silence as Kevin raked his underwear and clothes off the shelf and threw them into his gym bag without looking. "Don't worry. He'll play the free wolf, cool down and come back and apologize. You main thing at once, do not talk to him, and make first pretend that morally offended and convinced that perfectly well do without him." Lisa reassured and admonished Kathy. "I don't have to pretend. I can get along just fine without him. Even if it's not fine, it's terrible. You'll still have to get by somehow." Gloomily, Lisa assured him. "Why are you so downhearted?" Kathy continued to comfort her, not very confidently. Lisa interrupted her. "I'm sorry, Kathy. You're the best, but don't have any of this. He doesn't need me. I saw that last night. I don't understand why I didn't see it before. Not when I was comfortable needed. Aunt Clara was right. If I didn't have money from my grandmother's rent, he wouldn't have called me here. He'd have left alone. Promised to come back for me and disappeared. He's disappeared anyway." Lisa couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears again. She cried and was angry at herself for crying, for not being able to hold it in. It was as if Kathy had read her mind. "That's right. Don't be ashamed of me. Cry as much as you need to. You'll calm down quicker that way. I know what I'm talking about. We fools believe that we are loved, that they will take care of us. Sometimes we are lucky not to be wrong, but often we are not." Kevin didn't come back. Calming down, if you could call it that, her quiet, confused state, Lisa looked around and realized there were no things left in the apartment for him to come back for. All the little things they had managed to buy in the household only mattered to Lisa herself. Kevin had taken his clothes. Where does he live now? With the single Noah he'd made friends with at his new job. He loved the coziness and the lunches Lisa cooked from his grandmother's recipe with imagination. Was he so scared of the baby that he was even willing to sacrifice his comfort? Lisa had endured a whole week and still dialed his number. The subscriber's phone was switched off or out of range. Maybe she should go to his workplace. Kathy reasoned aloud, which conveyed Lisa's confusion. Do you want me to ask Ethan? He won't say no. He's such a chatterbox, it's not hard for him. He'll talk man to man, at least find out how your Kevin's feeling. Like you can't see it already. Lisa looked up at her. She'd lost weight, her face had gotten gaunt in the last week, and her anxious green-brown eyes seemed huge on him. Maybe he's not sure yet. Do you know how cowardly they really are? Uh-huh. Lisa smiled strainedly. I'm all out of money. I've gotten into an untouchable transfer for my grandmother's apartment, which I'm using to pay for this place. If I keep eating this money, I won't be able to pay the landlord here any time soon, not even next month. And I can't not eat. I'm very hungry for some reason. And Kevin knows my money situation, and he doesn't care. What have you decided about the baby? Kathy asked cautiously. I don't know what I've decided. I could feed myself, but the baby how? What will we live on when he's born and I can't work yet? I have no one, Kathy. I don't even have anyone to come to ask to babysit while I work. And I can't get rid of him. Don't look at me like that. I can't. That's all. I think it would be even worse then than it is now. Kathy walked around the kitchen, looked in the spice jars, and said, If your creep doesn't show up, you can always go home. At least there are all those aunts there who were friends with your grandmother will help you with something. But it's a last resort to go back without a dime. Your sentence is still quite short. You could have time to get a job here in Washington. Ideally, officially, of course, maternity leave. Employers don't like it when it's clear. They say you got a job on purpose, but they have their truth, you have yours. You need to live, and they will not take away. But with your profession and no experience, it may not work out that way. So at least you'll have something. I'll always buy you a meal and feed you if you need it. You won't run out. If you don't spend your paycheck, you'll save up some money here and come back to your town with a small reserve for the first time. Or maybe you'll be lucky enough to find something decent. Then you can stay in D.C. as long as you want. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'd do if I were you. Work first, and then we'll see. Lisa thought that's what she'd do. She just did. Half an hour later, her cell phone rang. It was Nancy from the Orchid. Lisa, hi. Listen, I won't tell you over the phone, but I think there's something for you. Benjamin wants to see you. He said he'd be at the salon by 3 o'clock this afternoon. So you should come too. Do you want your papers? Yeah, I doubt he'll be looking at your papers right away. Well, take a passport just in case, that you are not some Asian citizen, for example. Nancy laughed. I have no idea what he'll think of our unpredictable. Unpredictable. That's not very reassuring, Lisa thought. But you don't have to choose. It's a good thing she's not nauseous today, and she looks pretty good. She washed her hair and makeup, put on the newest of her weekday dresses, and even slipped into her heeled sandals, though she usually ran in more comfortable shoes. By 3 o'clock she was at the salon. The director had to wait another half hour. Lisa was having coffee with Nancy and a customer from the next door, a bright, freshly painted redhead, a cheerful lady. The bosses aren't late. The bosses are late, girls, announced the lady, wiggling funny. She entertained Lisa and Nancy with funny life stories. and the wait was neither anxious nor boring. But when the principal did arrive, the hilarious customer quickly said goodbye and left. "Nancy, instead of talking, why don't you clean this place up for once? Not your hair, but clean it up properly. I can't believe you don't have time. I can see from the receipts that you do." This he said from the doorstep without anger, with lazy irritation instead of greeting. The director seemed to be a stout, stocky middle-aged man, wearing a brightly colored Hawaiian shirt that was tight around his stomach. "Benjamin," Nancy sang good-naturedly, "have a cheerful outlook on life. Something wrong?" "Yesterday I was Nancy, Smarty Pants. Is this the girl you were telling me about?" Benjamin changed the subject. "Yes, this is Lisa, a certified hairdresser with—" "Hello, please take me on probation." "The girl Lisa, brown-eyed blonde." Benjamin hummed, quite friendly, taking a quick look at Lisa. "But the thing is, I don't need another hairdresser. I'd like to see if she's any better than Jenna. I'm not gonna mess with you. Why did you ask me to come?" Lisa asked, confused. "Nancy praised you so much that I wanted to see if you would be a good fit. I have a restaurant in addition to this place. Now I need another waitress, a pretty and smart one. Urgently, it's summer, the people went. I do not have time to go through the ads and do not really want to waste time. If it suits you, you'll earn money over the summer. Tips are and nothing, as far as I know, and in the fall we'll see. I'm just saying I won't make it official. It's not profitable for me. I do not have such fancy establishments. In the fall tourists will be less. Maybe half of them will have to be fired. As is usually the case, the work is seasonal. I'm on my way there right now. I can take you with me. You take a look around, see what you like, then we'll talk about shift pay." "Yes, thanks for the offer, of course I'll go." Lisa agreed right away. There's no point in pretending to be something. She's in the wrong situation. How long will she look for a job in her specialty? What if she's already in a position to be seen? And will she find one at all? You could end up with nothing, and this is a chance. Nancy, behind Benjamin's back, nodded quickly and waved her hand in the affirmative. And before Lisa knew it, she was working at Violet Punch for the 4th week. Yes, that was the taste in names that Benjamin and his companion James had. The Punch was in the same semi-basement as the Orchid, only with a larger space. There was 1 cook and an assistant and 2 waitresses per shift. One of the girls had recently graduated from college and decided to change the job she had held on to while she was a student. Lisa was hired in her place. The restaurant was quite cozy, frequented, inexpensive, and the place was quite busy, and the food was delicious. Another plus at work, of course, was that the food was not the same as that of the clients. It was cheaper and simpler. At first, Lisa was very happy. She wouldn't have to spend money on food on weekdays, saving money again. But more and more often there were days when every trip to the kitchen for an order became a feat for her. The mere smell of food made her sick. Even the most appetizing banquet style, not that of service food. Lisa worked in shifts, 2 days on, 2 days off, 11 o'clock to 11 o'clock p.m., and you'd never guess in the morning. How's the shift gonna go? Will you fly from morning till evening and chew cabbage, carrots, and apples all day, or barely crawl, holding on to the wall and trying not to look at the food, coming to the kitchen for an order? The doctor at the women's clinic where Lisa had registered for temporary registration explained. She has toxemia. It happens often, but it's nothing to worry about. It should pass soon. I wish it would go away soon. When the cook Charles, Lisa is calmer. He doesn't notice anything. He doesn't understand it, like all guys. He thinks it's just a girl who hasn't slept well. and Molly, the cook, looked suspiciously as if she had guessed it all long ago. Lisa tried not to think about it, remembering Kathy's advice. You need to take care of your nerves now, or you'll be in trouble later with a nervous child. It's just a job. You do it and you go. Who cares what anyone thinks? Kathy used to do that. She recently came back to work from maternity leave, returned to her accounting department, and about the tedious, nagging chief accountant that she told with laughter, without resentment and worry. Maybe it was good that the heat was a rarity in Washington. But one day it got unbearable on the shift. It would soon be over. She ran into the locker room, behind which was the restroom. She opened the door, undid the top 2 buttons of her white work blouse so as not to get it dirty. When I was about to get up and go to the hall, I heard behind me, "Don't make any sudden movements, girl. There are only 2 tables. The second waitress will manage without you. Let me make some tea, it helps. I've got a lot of mint growing in my cottage. I'll give it to you at home if you want it. Ginger tea also helps, and you should eat more often and sleep more. I've had 2, I know." Molly looked at Lisa without mockery, but also without pity, with calm understanding and sympathy. For some reason, Lisa felt not scared, but much better about the fact that she had punctured herself after all. In 10 minutes in the kitchen, while she drank mint tea, she told Molly her whole story. The usual story, she said. "Molly, are you going to take the groceries?" James asked behind her back. "Hello, Molly." In turn, Molly asked, deliberately mocking. Lisa even forgot that she was sick and realized with sober horror that James could have heard their conversation. This companion of Benjamin's, young, thin, and silent, really frightened her for some reason, unpleasant. He always came in unheard, his gait. With the cooks he sometimes says hello, even says something else. But the washers and waitresses are furniture, they never even dignify him with a word. Lisa jumped up at his discovery and happily clung to the elbow of Adriana, who had appeared in the kitchen. "Oh, Adriana, let's go for a second." Come on," said Adriana as soon as they were out the door. "So what? I had tea in the kitchen. There are no people in the hall. Don't be afraid of this, James. Benjamin is in charge, and this one is just pretending." In the evening, Benjamin arrived, in another Hawaiian shirt, and with a particularly heavy odor of booze for Lisa. He called Lisa into the kitchen room, the accountant's office. He examined the girl squeamishly and tiredly handed her an envelope. "This is your salary for the month. Check everything honestly. You don't work anymore." "Why?" Lisa asked with barely moving lips. How insolent modern girls are, especially from the periphery, like you. Why do you think you have the right to lie and set someone up when you've been stupid enough to get pregnant? Something happens to you at work. This is also in some labor inspectorate will go and tell how the bastard director did not register you for work, exploited you, and you will demand maternity money. I won't scold you and scare you, so that you don't faint immediately. I'm just asking you to go quietly and don't try to pull something like that. He was almost friendly, without anger, his voice smooth and lazy. Lisa had a lot of things she wanted to say, but she kept quiet. She wanted to toss him his money, but silently took the envelope. It would come in handy. It wasn't even for her. Let's really take this one somewhere, shall we? Kathy suggested it. Do you want me to report him for poisoning at his diner? Yeah, they'll just fire Molly or Charles. Lisa shook her head. Oh, right, that's out. Oh, we'll get the IRS on him. I'll say 2 times the check was not given at the service or sanitation or the fire department. I mean, what's the number of inspections he's gonna be pissed off about? Kathy, I won't feel better if he feels worse. Well, I would. Kathy confessed honestly. in their own apartment after work will not give rest after work. Kathy's husband, Ethan, muttered to Kathy. All their intrigues. Ethan couldn't tell whether he was joking or serious. The next day, Lisa slept most of the day. She woke up twice, drank strong tea in the kitchen, and went to bed again. She wanted nothing, thought of nothing, as if a dark curtain had fallen over her eyes. In the evening, Kathy rang the doorbell. "Come to our place." "Oh, come on. Ethan's going to be nagging you about me. He's asking for you. He's got something to say that he didn't get through to me," Kathy announced. Ethan was sitting in the kitchen, finishing his soup from a deep bowl that looked like a basin. "Lisa, I found out something for you. Maybe it'll be good for you. My buddy Liam is a decorator. He recently renovated a private house in the suburbs for a grandfather. It's a nice house, but he lives alone. He's taken a liking to Liam. He sees that he is a normal, honest kid and shared that he would rent one room to a woman if for ordinary household help, and that she would be his companion, even for free. There are all sorts of errands and talk. That's the deal. A favor for a favor. His living conditions are very good. He doesn't seem to be picky about cleaning, cooking. That's what he said. Maybe he's a freak." Kathy interrupted incredulously. "Liam says he's exactly normal. The right grandfather, just alone and with money. He says he will always manage through an agency, but he is not very trustworthy, so he asks all good acquaintances to recommend him. I thought of you right away." "Lying again?" Lisa asked tiredly. "Suddenly, a good man, he expects a quiet old age, and I'm hearing him bang and suddenly give birth. And if I find a job again, how will I have time to do his errands? Then you have to pay for the room like you're supposed to. Look, Lisa, don't confuse me. I'm not Sherlock Holmes, I'm slow. Why don't Liam just tell him honestly that this is your situation? That's probably the right thing to do. Let him decide for himself. Yes, no. Lisa nodded. Even Ethan wanted to help her. She thought he hated her for hanging around their place a lot. That didn't make sense. It wasn't likely to work out, but she should say thank you and pretend to hope. So she did. Ethan headed off to his Liam. Kathy exhaled noisily and offered, "Let's have some cherry pie for the night, shall we? If you're really hungry, it's okay for once. Do you think, Kathy, that something good could come out of it? Go and have a look. You've got nothing to lose. Just take a good look at the landlord. He's a tricky old man. Instead of hiring a housekeeper for a salary, he's looking for a girl who'll do the same duties for a room. Don't be shy. Just ask directly what exactly you have to do. Maybe there's plenty of work out there. That it's easier to rent a room for money than to do it all every day. Honestly, I couldn't do it. I sometimes hit my chief accountant with a stapler or a hole punch for her nagging. And there are 1,000,000 reasons for nagging, but it's still worth a look." On his first day off, Ethan took Lisa to meet his grandfather, who rents out his room. According to him, the grandfather was not at all confused by Lisa's story. He didn't even ask anything. Kathy planned to go with her husband and a friend, thinking of a good reason to take a walk with the child in the countryside. But Robert was ill, feverish and cranky, and they had no time for walks. Lisa imagined for some reason a big wooden house in a clearing, like merchants' estates from movies about old life. But the house turned out to be brick, also faced with stone, very stylish and beautiful. It was surrounded by a small garden, a few apple and cherry trees. Without a trace of beds and flower beds, you could see it through the fence. The fence was not a blank brick wall, but a wrought metal one. The graceful gate was open, but Ethan was too shy to enter, so he called on the phone. "Christopher, This is Ethan from Lyon. I've brought the girl Lisa to see your room. All right, let's go inside, Lisa. While they were walking along the stone-paved path to the house, the front door opened and the owner himself appeared on the threshold, holding a large and very shaggy white dog by the collar. From under his bangs, scrutinizing Lisa and Ethan. This is Olaf. He's as peaceful as a poof if you don't attack him and me. So don't be afraid of him for a minute if you're not going to attack him. And I, Christopher? To realize that the owner was already well over 70, you had to look carefully at his face, covered with a network of wrinkles, where deep and sharp, where thinner and smaller. His gaze was quick and sharp, not senile, but it was softened by the rays of wrinkles near his eyes. Not angry. Lisa exhaled quietly, and if you didn't look at his face, you wouldn't think he was an old man. His posture was that of a middle-aged man, his lean and wiry figure without a hint of decrepitude. Completely gray silver hair was cut very short, and a neat beard, as Christopher invited them into the house. So respectable on the outside, the house appeared cozy, but a little unusual on the inside. Of course, it was obvious by many signs that a woman's hand had not been here for a long time, although the owner obviously keeps order. But the main thing was that it was as if several different times had gathered in the house. So different was the furniture, even the bedspread and curtains. In the spacious hallway on the first floor, it was XX century, and in the living room, it was like the 19th. It was clear even to Lisa, who didn't understand antiques, that the furniture was vintage. She snapped to attention. It was probably rude to look at everything so closely. Ethan, at his host's suggestion, sat down on the edge of the guest sofa and demurely kept quiet. "Do you want to see your room right away, Lisa?" Christopher asked. "Have you already decided that I'm the right person for you?" Lisa was surprised and confused. "Have you already decided that I'm not the right person for you?" The owner laughed. "Don't be so quick to judge. Let's see the room. It is here on the first floor. I'm on the second floor. There's a study and a bedroom. The rest of the space is abandoned. It's just a bunch of old archives. I'm sorting through it, but I don't feel like it. If you'd like to keep me company, I'd really appreciate it. Of course, if you're interested." Christopher opened the light beige silent door. "This is the room. Come in, Lisa." The square room, overlooking a cozy corner of the garden, seemed very warm and cozy. There was only an old chest of drawers, a small table with a mirror, and a bed. "We'll find a closet for outfits," assured the owner. "If you don't like the curtains, change them. The main thing is not to tear down the load-bearing walls, and the rest is negotiable and solvable." Lisa remembered Kathy's instructions. "Christopher, I like the room. I just need you to tell me all your conditions at once in detail. You told Liam that you're renting out the place for household help, and I want to know what my duties will be. I'm conscientious. But you know I have some difficulties. What a businesslike girl you are." The owner smiled. "Your difficulties, as you put it, do not interfere. Maybe it will sound strange what I will tell you, but try to understand. I know you have no one. I don't have anyone either. I could hire a pro housekeeper, and I have, but I don't want to anymore. It's uncomfortable having someone else's professional servant in the house. I don't have a need for the house to be perfectly cleaned like a magazine, and I need to be served like a luxury hotel. I need a live person in the house badly. I like you, and I don't like all people. And household chores without fanaticism, all the same things you would do if I were your dad or grandfather, living under the same roof with you. Little by little according to mood, so that you do not doubt, this is not charity. This kind of work is worth about the price of a house. If you help me with the archive, That would be the most wonderful thing. I'll pay you as a secretary for that." Lisa had imagined the conversation with the owner of the house differently, and she had imagined him differently while she was on her way here. It seemed suspicious that everything was going so well. Well, she'll find out the pitfalls later. "Christopher, when can we move in?" "If your friend Ethan is willing to drive up and down to get your stuff, you can move in today. I'll give you money to stop by, buy us dinner, celebrate the housewarming." "Yeah, I'll make dinner." Lisa promised. "Let's go ask Ethan." It turns out that archives are not dusty and boring documents, but a very interesting thing. It's like reading a screenplay, only it was all real. Especially the diaries, they're alive. Something like the magicians of books, when there were no computers, and even typewriter was far from everyone and only at work. People just wrote down their thoughts, with a pen on paper, and even earlier, with a fountain pen in ordinary school notebooks, or beautiful, thick, swollen, from the lives they contained. And people had enough time for that, despite the fact that there were almost no household appliances, and life itself wasn't any easier. As Christopher said, life has simplified and lost a lot. No, there are a lot of good things now, but the old good things had better stay. It was very interesting with him in general. Kathy was worried that Lisa was bored on the outskirts of town with her old grandfather and called her to come and visit them more often on weekends. Lisa was happy to come, went for a couple of walks with Kathy and Robert around Washington, D.C., and then was just as happy to come back. "Oh, come on, my bunnies, I've got to go home," she said last Saturday, and surprised herself. At the same time as Kathy, she already thought of this house and the room in it as her real home, the one she'd lived in for a long time. And her grandmother's clock seemed to have always hung on the wall opposite her bed, where Christopher had hung it. "Not picking on you, Grandpa?" Kathy asked. "Well, about the variety of the menu, or that you put things in the wrong place when cleaning, that you're not neat enough or lazy? I mean, what kind of grudges can grandfathers have? Probably like my Ethan, only twice as much because of his age. To be honest, it's hard for me to even imagine Christopher as a fastidious old man." Lisa laughed. "It turns out that I don't do anything heavy at all, just basic things, the same things I did when I lived with my grandmother. Dinner, simple cleaning, and Christopher takes away my cleaning supplies if he thinks I should be tired by now. And he's always spoiling me with all kinds of good food. He says he bought it for himself, but he barely touches it. Kathy, he's not a typical grandfather. There was this story. There was a regular old professor, Professor Emeritus. He was inventing innovations for American industry and the military, and he had two favorite students. Both of them had been working with him for years, and then he started some big project, and he was really hoping to move it forward. One of his pupils worked with him on the technical part, and the other one was more forceful and dodgy, running through all kinds of instances. He was trying to get funding or some permits. For me, these technical scientific works are just a dark forest. I only realized one thing about them. They are very long, and the result is not always what you expect. And while these companions were working, the funding ran out. Soon there will be nothing to eat. It is unclear who will pay for the work at all. Already, at least from the house, all the valuable things in the pawn shop. And when everything was ready, one of the companion students disappeared. The one with the punching bag, Kathy guessed, took all the designs with him and took off. That's what it was all about. That's what it was. He went to the north, patented an invention there, provided for himself and his children for life. And these two honest martyrs of science, the professor almost had a stroke. He was ill for a long time, barely survived, and when he got back on his feet, his wife also took him to the north persuaded him. She had a close relative living there, married very well, and the second student stayed here in Washington. At first he thought he'd get drunk, but then somehow it all worked out. Talent, it finds a loophole. He met the right man, a very smart man. He started working for this man. He worked out a whole production for him and made good money back in the 90s. And then he got an inheritance from the North. It turns out that his favorite friend professor still managed to work there, but for himself, and the professor had no children. So he wrote a will, half of his property to his wife, half to his student and colleague, where I live. This old archive that we're going through now, it's the professor's. Christopher carried it everywhere with him, since it was left to him. The professor and his wife left their antique furniture to him before they left. They could have sold it. It is not cheap, but the professor wanted at least something valuable in memory of himself, the student, to leave. He felt he'd let him down with his earnings and recognition. So when Christopher bought the house, he moved everything in. So now he lives surrounded by these memories. He wants to sort through the archive and publish some of his favorites, as if he owes it to his teacher to have someone here to remember him. What a life people have lived. Kathy shook her head. Even intelligence isn't a guarantee that you'll live a problem-free life. Listen, why is he alone, your Christopher? If around such a wealthy grandfather there are no heirs, then, and really, there is no one. There's something wrong with him if no auntie's got her hands on him. Kathy, he doesn't mention that at all, and I don't ask. Maybe if he asked me something personal, I'd ask him. He doesn't ask me either. I think he's embarrassed. He's so well-bred that he doesn't pry into other people's business. Yes, intellectuals are complicated. Kathy confirmed, with a knowing look, as if she talks to professors every day. Maybe, on the contrary, it's easier to live like that if you follow all these rules. I won't make any predictions, so as not to jinx it, but so far, you seem to be having a good time. You've even gotten prettier. Even though you're digging through dusty archives. Yeah, I looked like a skinned otter when I moved in. Lisa agreed. Look, I'm not being intellectual, I'll ask you. Has Kevin showed up yet? Kathy, I'd be the first to tell you. You, Ethan, and Christopher are the only people I have in Washington. Christopher rarely forgets anything, and now he volunteered to help Lisa peel apples for jam. And it turns out he forgot his glasses in the office, probably left them on the desk, on the keyboard of his laptop. I'll be right there. Let me run. I want to run up the stairs. Lisa had only been in the office a few times. It was Christopher's diocese, as he put it. He tidied it himself, leaving it a comfortable mess, not without logic. Occasionally he'd do a little rearrangement, swapping books on the shelves or some figurines from the table to the shelf and back again. Now on his antique desk next to his laptop, besides his glasses, there was a chessboard with bone chess and a small photograph in a thin wooden frame. Lisa hadn't noticed any pictures in the study before, at least not in prominent places. In the black and white amateur photo, a little girl with 2 ponytails on top of her head, lying on the sand in a swath of sea surf, laughing and hugging a large striped bouncy ball. Lisa remembers every detail of this photo very well. She has the same one in her backpack, in the same folder with her passport, diploma, and several expensive photos. Christopher, the photo of the girl at sea. Where did you get it? Lisa asked, forgetting her shyness as soon as she went down to the kitchen and handed the owner of the house her glasses. I took this photo. I was into photography, Christopher replied. He looked anxiously at Lisa's face and listened to her strange mood. This is my daughter, Emily. I carry the same picture with me, and it came here with me. "That's my mom, Emily, but she's not your daughter." A good memory is not always a blessing. It's sometimes a curse. The beautiful Vanessa, whom he had adored until their last day together, as he had on their wedding day, stood before him a complete stranger. She had become even more beautiful in the week that Christopher had not seen her, but somehow different. A well-groomed, magazine beauty that could not be touched without danger. It suited her very well, and that gold, and that fur coat in which the man she had gone to had dressed her. And she said terrible things in her perfectly calm, quiet, and gentle voice. "I don't want the child to flit back and forth. She's still young. It will be easier for her to forget you and get used to a new father. Especially since Michael takes good care of her and wants her to call him Daddy. She'll have everything you could never give her. You know you can't give her anything except your love, which is nothing but words. This is a different life than the one your parents raised you for. She pestered me about you first, and to stop her asking for you, I told her you had another family and another daughter. You chose them. You know how much Emily loves me, and yet you decided to pull such a sneaky trick to make a child feel betrayed by her own father. Because of your harebrained fear that someday she'll find out the truth that you left me. She's past that. Kids forget things quickly, and when she's an adult, if she finds out, she'll understand me as a woman. And if you show up now, it'll only make her feel worse. Yeah, you've gotten to know me pretty well. I'm not gonna tell my daughter that her mother easily talked back to her father. At least let her mom be good to her." "Thank you." Chuckles. "I knew you'd understand. Christopher, I'm not filing for child support. I know how hard this must be for you." "Thank you, Honorable." He grinned through his teeth, turned and walked away. I didn't know where, but away. He didn't recognize anything else and never looked for anyone. He himself could not answer who was more protected, his daughter or himself. And he made a terrible mistake. Had he found his daughter in time, there would have been someone to support her when her mother turned away from her because his Emily had chosen an unfavorable husband. And Lisa's granddaughter, there'd be someone to support her and her stepfather's mother. Maybe still alive would be the only real Lisa grandmother, if her heart, to pay for serious treatment. But history does not bear the subjunctive mood, as his teacher and colleague said. Now it is necessary to live on and live a long time, because soon there will be another tenant in the house who will have to be taken care of for a long time until he can take care of himself. And it's easy and pleasant to live a long time when you have someone to take care of you. Kathy's voice sounded kind of strained, and she didn't call in the evening, as usual, but on her lunch hour. "Lisa, would you mind if I came straight over after work today?" "Nothing's wrong, everything's fine. I'm just in the mood to see you and chat. There's some little things I need to tell you." "Yes, come over, of course. Especially since Grandpa's going to a class reunion at his institute and he's worried about us being alone for so long. What if we need something in his absence and he's not here? I'll at least reassure him that we won't miss him." "Oh, good, considering all the traffic. I'll be at your place by 8 o'clock. Kathy promised. Lisa steamed Grandpa's weekend suit, the color of wet asphalt, and tied his tie. She approved of his gentlemanly appearance and walked him to the meeting. He waved a long time after the cab. Back in the house, she dressed Emily and went out into the garden with her. In its far sunny corner under an apple tree, unnoticeable from the road, they had a real nest set up. Grandpa had hung a baby hammock cocoon there for Emily. It seemed to Lisa that her daughter loved to lie there and watch the sun bunnies playing in the apple leaves. She would hum softly in her own language and then fall asleep and sleep soundly, no matter what sounds came from the road. And the clever dog Olaf, who knew not to bark now, sat nearby and just breathed noisily. There was also a small, elegant garden table and 2 armchairs at arm's length from the hammock. Grandpa and Lisa had been dining there for a month, since the middle of May, rocking and listening to her humming. She's going to have a beautiful voice. Grandpa laughed in a whisper, raising his index finger to the sky. And not for nothing did she go to the opera. When October rolled around, the city and nature became somehow especially dreary without coziness. Christopher came up with an entertainment for Lisa. What kind of theaters did she like? Lisa didn't know which ones she liked, or whether she liked them at all. "I've never been to one yet." Without shyness, she confessed. "In our town, there was nothing but the House of Culture, and here I didn't have time. We sometimes brought some performances, but I was never particularly interested in it." "I see. What would be interesting?" Grandpa kept up. "I love music," Lisa confessed. "Not electronic music for disco, but beautiful music, which is good for thinking or remembering something." And Grandpa took a season ticket to the musical theater. And he so mesmerized Lisa that she felt the baby moving there for the first time. The ultrasound showed it was going to be a girl. Lisa knew for sure. A girl listening to music with her, swooning during opera arias and dancing at operettas. Can you tell I'm making this up? But Emily liked the Queen of Spades the best. Lisa shared with Grandpa one day. He looked at her strangely and was silent for 5 minutes, like a deaf mute, as if he was talking to himself, but couldn't say it out loud. He just glared. Lisa realized only then. She didn't tell them how she had decided to call her girl at once, as she already called her. Emily was born in February, on a windy, blizzardy night. With balloons and flowers, they were greeted from the house by the 3 of them, Grandpa and Kathy with Ethan. Ethan drove them home, and just as the friends were leaving after a small buffet, Grandpa Christopher sat down across from Lisa and asked, "Why don't you tell your father, Emily, that she was born?" "What do you think?" "Grandpa, you haven't asked anything about him in so long." "I thought you'd never ask. You don't want to know anything about him." "I just saw that you didn't want to talk about him. And now it's a day like this. Maybe you'll see things differently. The trouble with people like you is that you judge others by yourself." Lisa objected. "In some ways you're right. But don't forget that I'm old. I've learned a few things, and I've gotten rid of my naivete. Just bring me up to speed, at least briefly, while our girl is asleep." And Lisa did. To her immense surprise, it was not at all hard for her to tell her grandfather about Kevin and how easily he had left her. It was like retelling a movie or a novel. It didn't have the slightest relevance to her anymore. She has a different life with other people in charge. Grandpa agreed with Lisa. Everyone who should know about Emily's birth had already been notified. It turned out that it only seemed to Lisa that the recent past had evaporated completely. Kathy tipped it over, looked at a lump at the sleeping Emily and said, sitting down on the edge of the chair, "Lisa, you'll just have to forgive me. I beg you in advance. I'm a fool, I admit it. Don't scare me with your preambles." Lisa warned me. She had almost no doubts about what she was going to talk about. We had a big corporate retreat at work. 20th anniversary of the company. A campground, a barbecue. Toward the end of the evening, we hit the bumps to talk. Well, we have a purely female company gathered on the open veranda, all ages from 30 to 55, and there was the usual conversation about how hard it is to raise a child alone, that say, it is better not to decide on it at all. It's always poverty problems. And somehow everyone fell into such pessimism, strange for a corporate party, that I wanted to tell something good, saying that it's not always so bad. So I told your story, how you found your grandfather. I didn't even say your name, but I told them you were my friend. The girls were surprised, happy for you and your daughter, cheerful. It would seem that was the end of it, but it wasn't. A day later, on Sunday, the doorbell rings. There's your ex on the doorstep, looking for you. I let him in, of course, because I'm not rude. Actually, I was just confused by the surprise and forgot that I should have turned on boorish. I said, "This is a phenomenon." And then he started to me obviously according to the prepared scenario. Apparently, he realizes that I consider him a scoundrel, and he completely agrees he is a scoundrel, but only realized everything, and so on in the same style. Probably watched a couple shows as a guide. I'm sitting there nodding, pretending to be touched by his remorse. He sings to me that he would have apologized to you a long time ago if you hadn't changed your phone number and place of residence. He lost track of you, you see, and he's just now decided to ask me. He was so ashamed to show up. I was too lazy to even ask him tricky questions. I was so disgusted. They're taking me for a fool. No, I don't claim to be a smart woman, but not to that extent. How do I get away from him? I don't know. It's a shame Ethan was out fishing with Liam. That would have been easier. Kevin started begging me, "Give me an address, at least give me a phone number." So I said, "I have my own life and my own business. I don't have time to deal with other people's. We haven't talked for a long time since we separated. We were just roommates. Maybe Lisa went home. Why don't you go to your town if you have to?" And he didn't believe me for a second. "Here we go. Don't lie to me, Kathy. I didn't do anything to hurt you." He's angry and about to threaten me, even though it's not good for him. I was lucky there was no bite, and Ethan got home early. So Ethan kicked him out. Talked to him in the street. Kathy paused for a big sip of frozen coffee, patted Olaf's withers, and without waiting for Lisa to comment, continued. "I'm just convinced, I was convinced from the beginning, that his appearance had something to do with me talking about you at the corporate party. He found out that you had a good life and decided to try his luck and get a big piece of it. It just seems like a big city. In such cases, you realize how small it is. Someone always sees something, hears something, and passes it on to someone else. And I'm an accountant. I'm next to the HR department. I am friends with our personnel officer, told the situation, and asked to look in case in the questionnaires were the husbands of those girls who sat with us in the company and listened to my story. Went in, looked it up for a short time. Only 7 girls turned out to be married, and the hunch didn't fool me. Evelyn from sales has her husband's place of employment on her profile, a luxury car service, just like your Kevin. You said the name, and I remember things like that. Here's the most likely Kevin is a buddy, Evelyn's husband, and she told the story in front of him from the corporate party. And this goose, of course, recognized himself and you. It's too much of a match. Didn't I mention you were recently my roommate? Lisa, I'm sorry, and be aware that he might show up." "Kathy, you're so full of it." Lisa smiled, trying to smile as serenely as possible. "You've made such a detective out of nothing. You've even looked into the personnel files. It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have foreseen anything. It was just a story to get you in the mood. I've always loved hearing other girls' interesting stories, too. I didn't even think there could be anything wrong with it, as long as you don't gossip or say mean things behind their backs, but just talk about the person. Thank you for not being mad at me. I'd understand if you were mad at me. Are you going to do something about it? What do you mean?" Lisa didn't understand. Shove the baby in a suitcase and run off somewhere? No one came to see me. Even if Kevin somehow finds out where I live, it's not like he's going to come here. If you didn't tell him it's just the 3 of us, maybe he's picturing a mansion with columns, an alarm system, a panic button, and a couple of grim bodyguards. Yeah, I didn't mention that. Kathy exhaled with a sigh of relief. Oh, I even said that you have a gorgeous dog, a South Russian sheepdog. By the way, this breed is considered unpredictable and aggressive. Sorry, Olaf. By the way, you do have an alarm system, don't you? Grandpa returned home, lively, satisfied with the meeting with old friends, joked, retold stories of classmates, sent greetings from them, granddaughter and great-granddaughter. And he announced that he missed her. Lisa did not bother to tell him about the incident that had happened to Kathy. It wasn't right if he was only going to take care of her and her. He had to be taken care of too. And there's no one else to do that but her. Sure, she was scared at the first moment, but just a little bit, and at the very first moment. Kevin is not a villain or a criminal mastermind, but a very ordinary, selfish guy. There's nothing to fear at all. She'll figure something out if he shows up. A month later, Lisa had almost forgotten Kathy's warning. She had no time to think about unpleasant things. Her daughter was growing up. She was already sitting up in her crib, in her stroller, trying to sit up even in the soft hammock cocoon. When she saw Olaf, she was happy and stretched her arms to him, trying to run them into his shaggy fur. Don't worry, Grandpa reassured her. Olaf understands perfectly well that it's a puppy. Kathy came almost every weekend with Robert, sometimes with Ethan as well. But Lisa also wanted to go to Washington all of a sudden. Grandpa was supportive. I'm surprised you haven't gotten bored yet. At your age, solitude is usually hard to bear. The baby's over 6 months old. It's time for you to get out into the world. Go out with Kathy at least. Just have a carefree summer cafe. Do moms need a vacation too? Why don't you pump your milk, and I'll feed Emily without you? Grandpa, I'm amazed at your expertise in so many areas. What did you think? I read literature about children and control quietly the process of cultivation and upbringing. Grandpa grinned, and Lisa went to Kathy's. They didn't sit in an outdoor cafe, but walked around the zoo with Robert, but they still had a great time. They said they were going to come here with Emily very soon to show her the bigger animals than Olaf. She'd definitely be interested. They talked about when Emily gets a little older. Lisa will open a little beauty parlor. Grandpa wants to help her start a business that she enjoys, and it would just be great if Kathy would agree to do the bookkeeping. We did 3 laps around the zoo. Robert didn't want to leave. When they managed to get him out, they bought ice cream and sat down with him on a park bench. Lisa took a bite of the ice cream with pleasure and heard a half-forgotten familiar voice from the side. Lisa. She flinched. It seemed to her that Kathy did too. Robert was running around the flower bed, eating his ice cream on the run. Kevin stepped out of the mottled shade of a tree and stood in front of them. Lisa, hello. Lisa, we have to go, said Kathy. We're running late. Let's go. Kathy, wait for me literally just a little bit. Lisa heard her own carefree voice. I'm interested. It won't take long. I'm listening. The last kindly and different words were intended for Kevin. Where is our daughter? He asked, making a worried face. We don't have anything of ours. Peacefully, Lisa explained. Lisa, forgive me if you can. I need you and the daughter. It just took me a long time to realize it. I'll do anything for you if you'll let me try to start over. Kathy told you I was looking for you. Kathy stood back by the flower bed and listened, not even pulling away, Robert bouncing around her. Lisa gave a slightly derisive grin. Very, very theatrical. I have nothing to forgive you for. It was, and it came up. So it had to be. Thanks for the daughter. She's beautiful. What have you become? Kevin said in a muffled voice, reproachful and admiring at the same time. "You look like Hollywood. Anything else? It's really time for us to go. I don't hold it against you, Kevin. And I'm not filing for alimony. Don't worry, you'll still have all your savings. Lisa, don't do this to me. You couldn't have gotten over it so fast. I know you. It wouldn't be you. People don't change that fast, and we have a daughter, and you won't even let me look at her? I know you found your grandfather, but that's not the father. I'm not giving up until you give me a chance. Now he's going to play the macho man who decided to fight for his love." Lisa rose from the bench, walked slowly around Kevin, lightly stroked his shoulder, and made sure he took it as a good sign, and said in the same nonchalantly peaceful and calm voice, "People change, and they change fast when circumstances force them to. I know you're aware of my financial changes, so you're under no illusions, but I'm glad I wasn't married to you by the time I found my grandfather. You can find a much better option with an inheritance, even with a child. One more piece of advice. If you're looking for me or my daughter, let me know in any way. You know who made what and how they made money in the 90s, who they socialized with, right? My grandfather's acquaintance, and now I have a corresponding one. My grandfather owes a lot to the reputable Mr. William. If that name tells you anything, such men do not forfeit their protection without cause. You can always turn to them to get rid of unwanted interference. Like you, Kevin, it's nothing personal. Consider it a sign of forgiveness." "Bitch." Kevin exhaled angrily into her ear and turned and walked across the lawn toward the zoo. Now he's going to disappear from the horizon. Kathy spoke up. "Hey, I wasn't expecting you. You've really changed, haven't you?" "I felt like I wasn't alone in the world, so I changed. I can see that." "Lisa, who's William? You never told me about him. Is he the guy your grandfather invented the production lines for?" "I don't even know his last name." "Kevin will do. I just thought of him." Passers-by turned around. Some irritated, but most smiled. How cheerful, infectious the laughs of those young, beautiful girls, and the little boy, covered to the ears in ice cream, running around them so contentedly. Ethan came to pick them up, as arranged. "Oh, I barely made it through the traffic." He exhaled. "Imagine some uncle jumped up to me and Liam while we were fishing and started to claim with arrogance that we occupied his permanent place. There's his chair, there's his flat tire. There's his rotten fishing rod stands made of driftwood. That's a first in my life. And you know me, Kathy, if he'd asked nicely, we'd have left. And after he was so rude, I told him, 'Listen, when you save up, buy this place from the city, fence it in, it'll be yours. In the meantime, behave yourself with decent people, you'll be better off.' You're just like William, my love," said Kathy. "Have you met anyone I don't know?" "It's not mine, it's Lisa's." Ethan replied that they shouldn't be laughing. There was nothing to laugh about. He would bring Lisa home and tell her grandfather that she had some strange acquaintances, ostentatious macho men about whom nothing was known in the house. You have to be serious and think more about the kids.